Every dream began the same way. Maya Brooks stood alone beneath a chandelier so magnificent it looked as though 1,000 stars had been trapped inside crystal. Around her, the ballroom shimmered with polished marble floors, glittering gowns, tailored tuxedos, and soft music drifting through the air. Laughter floated from every corner, warm and effortless, until she noticed something unsettling. Everyone had stopped talking. One by one, their eyes turned toward her. Not with curiosity, with judgment. She looked down. She was wearing the same navy blue dress she had owned for years. Its sleeves had been mended more times than she could count. The hem had been stitched by careful hands. The fabric had faded ever so slightly with time, but it was spotless, pressed, and worn with quiet dignity. Still, someone whispered. Then another voice joined in. Did she really come here wearing that? I've seen curtains that cost more. She doesn't belong in a room like this. The whispers spread through the ballroom like ripples across still water. Maya wanted to disappear. She tried to take a step backward, but her feet refused to move. She opened her mouth to explain that the dress had once belonged to the woman who taught her what dignity meant. But no words came. The room blurred. The music faded. Her heartbeat grew louder than every voice around her. Then, from somewhere behind the crowd, a calm voice broke through the silence. Clear, steady, certain. You're all looking at the wrong thing. The whispers stopped. The crowd slowly parted. A tall man began walking toward her. She couldn't see his face. Only the confidence in his stride. Only the kindness in his voice. He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapped gently around hers. Then he looked at everyone in the room and said, I'm proud to introduce the most extraordinary woman in my life. Maya held her breath. My wife. The ballroom disappeared. Maya's eyes flew open. She sat upright in bed, breathing hard. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 5:42 a.m. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest and waited for her heartbeat to slow. The dream again. Always the same ballroom. Always the same dress. Always the same voice. But never a face. She had spent months trying to understand why her mind insisted on returning to a place she had never been, and to people she had never met. Or had she? Some memories don't announce themselves as memories. They disguise themselves as dreams until we're finally ready to understand them. Have you ever carried a memory that followed you into your sleep? Or found yourself believing something about your own worth because of a single painful moment you could never forget? If you have, then this story may stay with you long after it ends. Welcome back to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, the place where love is more than romance. Here, every story is a journey through heartbreak, hope, forgiveness, and the quiet lessons that shape our lives. If you're new to the channel, we'd love to have you as part of our family. Take a second to subscribe, like this video, and let us know in the comments. Have you ever been judged before someone truly knew you? Your story might encourage someone else who needs to hear it today. Now, let's begin. Maya slowly swung her legs over the side of the bed. Outside, Seattle was still waking beneath a grey morning sky. Inside her small apartment, everything was exactly where she had left it the night before. The kettle waited on the stove. A stack of library books rested neatly on the dining table. Beside them sat a small wooden sewing box with faded scratches across its lid. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because some mornings began with coffee. Others began with memories. And this morning, both were waiting for her. The kettle began to whistle before Maya Brooks reached the kitchen. She turned off the burner, poured steaming water into her favorite ceramic mug, and watched the tea leaves slowly bloom beneath the surface. It was a ritual she never rushed. Her grandmother used to say that people who hurried through quiet mornings usually spent the rest of the day chasing peace they had already abandoned. Maya smiled at the memory. Even after 5 years, Grace Brooks still found ways to speak into her mornings. The apartment was small, but welcoming. A bookshelf occupied nearly an entire wall, filled with novels whose corners had softened from years of careful reading. A potted fern sat beside the window, stretching toward the pale Seattle sunlight filtering through the clouds. Framed photographs rested on a narrow shelf above the fireplace, most of them featuring Maya and her grandmother at different stages of life. One picture always held her attention longer than the others. Grace stood behind a 10-year-old Maya, both of them laughing as they tried to sew a patch onto a torn backpack. The stitching wandered in crooked lines, but neither of them seemed to care. Perfect isn't memorable, Grace had said that afternoon. Love is. Maya wrapped both hands around her mug. Those words had followed her into adulthood, more faithfully than almost anything else. After breakfast, she carried the empty cup to the sink before walking toward her bedroom closet. There, hanging by itself, was the navy blue dress. She gently lifted it from the hanger. The fabric was smooth beneath her fingertips, though years of wear had softened it considerably. She ran her thumb across the sleeve until she found the tiny loose thread she had noticed the night before. "There you are," she whispered. Most people would have ignored something so small. Others would have replaced the dress years ago. Maya reached for the old wooden sewing box sitting on her dresser. Its brass latch squeaked as she opened it. Inside lay neatly organized spools of thread, tiny scissors with worn handles, a silver thimble, and several carefully folded fabric scraps. Everything still looked exactly as Grace had left it. Maya selected a spool of navy thread that almost perfectly matched the dress. Almost. Grace used to laugh whenever colors didn't match exactly. "Nothing in life matches perfectly," she would say. "That's why people look for harmony instead." Maya threaded the needle with practiced hands. As she worked, memories drifted quietly into the room. She was 8 years old again. Rain tapped against the roof of her grandmother's tiny house outside Spokane. Grace sat beside an old Singer sewing machine while humming an old gospel hymn. On the table rested one of Maya's school dresses. The knee had torn after Maya climbed a chain-link fence during recess. "I'm sorry," young Maya had whispered, convinced she had ruined it forever. Grace looked up and smiled. "Sweetheart, do you know what makes fabric valuable?" Maya shook her head. "The people who wear it." She held up the torn dress. "This tear only tells me you've been busy living." That answer had confused Maya back then. Now, as an adult, it felt wiser every year. She tied the final knot, trimmed the thread, and held the dress toward the window. The repair was nearly invisible. Satisfied, she placed it carefully across the bed. Her phone buzzed. The screen displayed a message from Olivia Harper. "Good morning, Maya. Looking forward to seeing you tonight at the Literacy Foundation Gala. Don't forget, the program starts at 7. Maya stared at the message for several seconds. The gala. She had accepted the invitation weeks ago. Now she wasn't sure she wanted to go. She had attended enough fundraising events to know how they usually unfolded. Elegant gowns, tailored suits, conversations about investments, vacations, and designer brands. She never quite knew where she fit into rooms like that. She typed a reply. "Looking forward to it. Thank you again for inviting me." Then she set the phone down without sending another message. For a moment, she considered closing the closet and choosing a different outfit. Something newer. Something safer. She searched through the hangers. A grey dress. A black skirt. A cream-colored blouse. Nothing felt right. Eventually her eyes returned to the navy blue dress. She laughed softly. "I guess it's you and me again." At the Seattle Community Library, the morning passed in its familiar rhythm. Children hurried toward the reading corner after school buses arrived. College students claimed their favorite study tables. An elderly gentleman returned 3 mystery novels and insisted on recommending another one to anyone who would listen. Maya loved every ordinary moment. Books had taught her something people rarely did. Every cover hid a story. Every story deserved patience before judgment. Near lunchtime, a little girl approached the circulation desk clutching a picture book. "Miss Brooks?" Maya looked up. "Yes?" "My mom says we can't buy books right now." Maya smiled gently. "That's okay." The girl's shoulders relaxed. "But I really wanted this one." Maya leaned across the counter. "Do you know the best thing about libraries?" The girl shook her head. "They let you borrow adventures for free." The little girl grinned. "Really?" "Really." Together, they completed the checkout process. As the child skipped away, hugging the book against her chest, Maya watched with quiet satisfaction. Moments like these reminded her why she had never regretted choosing this career. Money mattered. Of course it did. Bills needed paying. Dreams often required resources, but there were rewards that never appeared on bank statements. Watching someone discover hope inside the pages of a book was one of them. Later that afternoon, Olivia Harper stopped by the library. She carried a folder beneath one arm and greeted Maya with her usual warmth. "I had a feeling I'd find you surrounded by books." "They're easier company than most people," Maya joked. Olivia laughed. "I wanted to remind you how grateful we are for everything you've done this year. It was a team effort." "You always say that." "Because it's true." Olivia studied her for a moment. "You know, there will be a lot of influential people at tonight's gala." "I'm aware." "You deserve to be there." The words settled somewhere deep inside Maya, not because she believed them immediately, but because she wanted to. After Olivia left, Maya stood quietly between 2 tall bookshelves. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark library window. She thought about the dream, about the ballroom, about the whispers, about the dress waiting at home. She couldn't explain why her heart felt uneasy, only that something about tonight seemed strangely familiar, as if she were walking toward a memory she hadn't lived yet. Outside, grey clouds drifted slowly across the Seattle sky. Inside, Maya took one slow breath before returning another stack of books to their shelves. She had no idea that by the end of the evening, her life would begin changing in ways neither dreams nor memories could have prepared her for. By the time Maya locked the front doors of the Seattle Community Library, the afternoon sky had surrendered to the familiar gray of a Pacific Northwest evening. She stood on the library steps for a moment, breathing in the cool air. Normally, she walked home. Tonight, she called a rideshare. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched Seattle drift past the window, coffee shops glowing beneath hanging lights, couples walking hand in hand despite the drizzle, office workers hurrying toward buses with collars turned against the wind. The city had always felt like a novel to her. Every passing face was another chapter. Every stranger carried a story no one else could read. She wondered how many of them were quietly carrying memories they wished they could rewrite. When she reached her apartment, the silence greeted her like an old friend. She hung her coat by the door and glanced toward the bedroom. The navy blue dress still rested neatly across the bed, exactly where she had left it that morning. For a long time, she simply looked at it. "It'll be fine," she whispered to herself. Then she laughed. It wasn't the dress she was trying to convince. It was herself. An hour later, Maya stood before the mirror. The dress fit just as comfortably as it always had. Simple, elegant, without unnecessary decoration. She fastened the tiny silver earrings that had belonged to her grandmother and slipped a delicate bracelet around her wrist. No diamonds. No designer labels, just memories. She reached into the wooden sewing box one last time. Tucked beneath the spools of thread was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was written in Grace Brooks' familiar handwriting. Never wear clothes to impress people. Wear them to remind yourself who you are. People who deserve your heart will always notice your character before your closet. Maya smiled as tears gathered in her eyes. "You always knew exactly what I needed," she whispered. She folded the note and slipped it into her purse. For reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted her grandmother close tonight. The Grand Regency Hotel stood like a palace against the Seattle skyline. Its entrance glowed beneath rows of golden lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, while sharply dressed valets hurried from one vehicle to another. As Maya stepped from the rideshare, she instinctively smoothed the front of her dress. Not because it was wrinkled, because she suddenly felt 12 years old again. She thanked the driver before walking toward the entrance. The revolving glass doors opened into a breathtaking lobby. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ceiling. Fresh white lilies filled enormous arrangements. A grand piano rested near the staircase, while soft jazz drifted through the air. Everything sparkled. Everything seemed impossibly expensive. A young hostess greeted her with a warm smile. "Good evening. Welcome to the Seattle Literacy Foundation Gala." Maya returned the smile. "Thank you." After checking her invitation, the hostess handed her a name badge. "We're honored you're here, Miss Brooks." Those words surprised her. Honored. No one had ever used that word to describe her attendance at an event like this. She pinned the badge to her dress and stepped into the ballroom. For a brief moment, the room disappeared. The polished marble floor, the towering chandeliers, the elegant music, the conversations, her breath caught. The dream. Not exactly, but close enough that a chill traveled down her spine. She glanced around carefully. No one was staring. No one was whispering. Yet, she reminded herself that dreams weren't predictions. They were only echoes of fears we hadn't finished understanding. Still, her heart refused to believe it. "Maya!" Olivia Harper hurried toward her with open arms. "You made it!" "I almost didn't." "I'm so glad you changed your mind." Olivia stepped back and smiled warmly. "You look lovely." Maya instinctively looked down at her dress. "Thank you. And thank you again for everything you've done for the foundation this year. I've enjoyed every minute. I'd like you to meet a few donors later tonight." Maya hesitated. "I'm not very good at small talk." Olivia laughed. "Talk about books. I can definitely do that." "Exactly." For the first time that evening, Maya relaxed. Maybe tonight wouldn't be so difficult after all. The ballroom slowly filled with guests. Waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks and elegant appetizers. Soft laughter floated through the room. A string quartet replaced the jazz pianist. Everywhere Maya looked, conversations flowed effortlessly. She admired how confident everyone seemed, how naturally they belonged. She wondered if confidence was something people were born with, or something they purchased after reaching a certain income. Almost immediately she dismissed the thought. Grace would have scolded her. "Money can buy a suit," her grandmother used to say. "It can't teach someone how to wear kindness." An older gentleman approached her refreshment table. He smiled politely. "I don't believe we've met." "Maya Brooks." She offered her hand. "Arthur Donnelly." They exchanged pleasantries before discovering a shared love for classic American literature. Within minutes they were discussing Harper Lee, Toni Morrison and John Steinbeck as though they were old friends. Maya forgot about her dress, forgot about the ballroom, forgot about herself. Books had always done that. They reminded her that ideas mattered more than appearances. Arthur eventually excused himself for another conversation. Before leaving, he smiled. It's refreshing to meet someone who still believes stories can change people. Maya watched him disappear into the crowd. I think they already do, she whispered. Nearly an hour passed. The ballroom grew louder. The conversations became increasingly centered around business acquisitions, investment portfolios, luxury vacations, and corporate expansion. Maya found herself standing quietly beside one of the enormous windows overlooking downtown Seattle. Below, headlights stretched across rain-soaked streets like ribbons of light. She suddenly felt very far away from everyone inside. Not lonely, just out of place. She reached into her purse and touched her grandmother's folded note. Without opening it, she felt calmer. Then she noticed the hotel garden beyond the glass doors. Small stone pathways, flower beds, benches surrounded by soft lights. The quiet looked inviting. She slipped outside. The evening air carried the scent of wet roses and cedar trees. Rain had stopped. The city hummed gently beyond the garden walls. For the first time all evening, she could breathe. She wandered slowly along the pathway until she reached a wooden bench overlooking a small reflecting pond. Someone was already sitting there. A man, tall, well-dressed. His suit was expensive, though not flashy. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't talking to anyone. Instead, he was reading a book. Maya couldn't help smiling. Of all the places to find someone reading during a gala, the man looked up, noticing her. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then he closed the book with one finger marking his place. Escaping the crowd? He asked, with a gentle smile. Maya laughed softly. Was it that obvious? A little. She glanced toward the ballroom doors. I was beginning to think I might be the only person here who needed a break. You aren't. She looked at the book in his hands. To Kill a Mockingbird. His eyes brightened. You recognized it from the cover. I'm a librarian. That explains the smile. And you're reading during a charity gala. He chuckled. I suppose that requires an explanation. Only if you have one. I've learned people reveal more about themselves in books than they do in conversations. Maya considered that for a moment. I think you're right. He shifted slightly on the bench. I'm Ethan. She extended her hand. Maya. Neither of them knew it yet. But the conversation that began beside a quiet garden pond over a worn copy of a beloved novel would become the first page of a story that neither memory nor dreams had ever been able to predict. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, even though you had every right to be there? Maybe it wasn't because of your clothes. Maybe it was your background, your job, your accent, or simply the fear that people were judging you before they even knew your name. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone else who's carrying the same silent burden. And if you're enjoying this journey with Maya so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Trust me, Maya's story is only just beginning, and the next chapter introduces someone who will challenge everything she believes about love, worth, and the power of being truly seen. The following morning, Maya woke before her alarm. For a few quiet seconds, she lay still, staring at the ceiling while the previous evening replayed in fragments. The ballroom, the garden, the man with the book. Ethan. It wasn't his appearance that lingered in her mind. It was his questions. Most people asked what she did for a living before asking what she loved. Ethan had done the opposite. He had asked which book had changed her life. It had been such a simple question, yet no one had asked her that in years. She smiled to herself. Then she caught herself smiling. Don't do this, she whispered. It was one conversation. She climbed out of bed and opened the curtains. Seattle greeted her with another grey morning. Rain clung to the windows, and the city moved at its usual unhurried pace. She made tea, watered the fern by the window, and prepared for another day at the library. Life, she reminded herself, had a way of returning to ordinary routines. Yet something felt different. Not dramatic, just lighter. The library was already busy when Maya arrived. A group of elementary school children filled the reading corner with laughter, while volunteers arranged chairs for the afternoon literacy workshop. Good morning, Miss Brooks. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lily, the little girl who had borrowed the picture book the day before. She ran toward Maya, hugging the book tightly. I finished it. In one night? Maya laughed. Lily nodded proudly. My mom read it to me twice. And what was your favorite part? The part where the little rabbit wasn't afraid anymore. Maya smiled. Books have a funny way of helping us become brave. Lily looked thoughtful. My mom says brave people are just scared people who keep going. For a moment, Maya simply stared at her. Children had a remarkable way of saying profound things without realizing it. Your mom sounds very wise. Lily grinned before skipping back to the children's section. Maya watched her go. Grace would have liked that little girl. Near lunchtime, Olivia Harper walked into the library carrying a stack of folders. I was hoping you'd be here. I usually am. Olivia laughed. I wanted to thank you again for last night. It was a beautiful event. It was also a successful one. She handed Maya one of the folders. We raised enough funding to expand 3 community reading programs. Maya's face lit up. That's wonderful. It gets even better. Olivia opened the folder. One of the largest anonymous donors specifically asked that your library receive additional funding for children's literacy. Maya blinked. Our library? Yes. Anonymous? Olivia nodded. He said the recommendation came after a conversation that reminded him why books matter. Maya immediately thought of the hotel garden. No, it couldn't be, could it? She pushed the thought aside. Seattle had many generous people. There was no reason to assume it had anything to do with Ethan. Still, the timing felt strangely familiar. Across the city, Ethan Calloway stood inside the executive boardroom of Calloway Technologies. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Seattle. Executives discussed quarterly profits, expansion plans, and international partnerships. Charts filled enormous digital screens. Numbers climbed. Forecasts improved. Applause followed another successful presentation. Ethan barely noticed. His notebook remained open beside him. Instead of writing financial projections, he had written 4 words. Books reveal true character. Daniel Rhodes glanced toward him. You planning to become a novelist? Ethan closed the notebook. Just thinking. Dangerous habit. I've survived it so far. The meeting finally ended. As everyone gathered their laptops and documents, Daniel walked beside him toward the elevator. You've been unusually distracted since last night. I met someone. Daniel stopped walking. You met someone? Ethan smiled. I had a conversation. That's not what I asked. It wasn't like that. Daniel folded his arms. Then why are you smiling? Ethan considered the question. Because she never once asked what he owned. She never tried to impress him. She spoke about books as though they were living companions. She listened before answering. And for the first time in a very long while, someone made him feel like simply being Ethan was enough. I met a librarian, he finally said. Daniel laughed. A librarian? Yes? You realize you're smiling again. I know. That afternoon, Maya organized donated books for the weekend literacy fair. As she stacked novels into neat piles, she found an old hardcover edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. She paused. The same book Ethan had been reading. Without thinking, she opened the cover. Inside, someone had written in careful handwriting, "The right story always finds the right reader." She closed the book slowly. Some people believed coincidence was random. Maya wasn't so sure. Sometimes life repeated small details until we paid attention. Just before closing time, Olivia returned with exciting news. The anonymous donor has another request. What is it? He'd like to sponsor a monthly community reading program. Maya's eyes widened. That's incredible. There's one condition. What kind of condition? Olivia smiled. He wants someone from the library to help organize it. Maya laughed nervously. I'm guessing that someone is me. Olivia grinned. He specifically asked for the librarian who believes every book deserves a second chance. Maya's smile faded into quiet surprise. There was only one person who had heard her say those exact words. The man in the hotel garden. Ethan. She looked down at the folder in her hands. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart began beating just a little faster. Maya read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it back inside the folder. She looked at Olivia. Did he leave a name this time? Olivia shook her head. No. He only asked whether you'd be willing to meet with him to discuss the reading program. When? Tomorrow afternoon. So soon? He said he doesn't like wasting time when children are waiting for opportunities. Maya couldn't help smiling. That sounds exactly like something a librarian would say. Olivia laughed. Actually, I think he's in business. Really? I don't know much more than that. Maya nodded, though she was almost certain she already knew who the anonymous donor was. Still, she refused to make assumptions. Grace had always warned her about that. Assumptions are unfinished stories, her grandmother used to say. Wait until you've read the whole chapter. The next afternoon arrived with gentle rain and cool autumn air. The meeting was scheduled inside a small independent bookstore that shared space with a neighborhood coffee shop. It wasn't glamorous. There were no marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just the comforting scent of coffee, paper, and old wood. It felt like home. Maya arrived 10 minutes early. She wandered through the history section while waiting. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "I was hoping you'd come." She turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. He wore dark jeans, a navy sweater, and a charcoal coat instead of the tailored suit from the gala. Without the formal clothes, he looked surprisingly ordinary, approachable, real. "I thought it might be you," Maya admitted. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." He handed her one of the cups. "I remembered you drink tea." She looked at the cup. "This is tea. I asked the barista for her recommendation." "You remembered? You seemed like someone worth remembering." The words were simple, unforced, yet they landed somewhere deep inside her. They settled into 2 chairs near the bookstore window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Neither seemed in a hurry to begin discussing the literacy program. Instead, Ethan asked, "What book made you become a librarian?" Maya smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." She wrapped both hands around her cup before answering. "My parents worked long hours when I was growing up. Most afternoons I stayed with my grandmother." "The one you mentioned?" She nodded. "She couldn't afford many things, but every Saturday she took me to the public library." "What did you read?" "Everything." He laughed. "I believe that. I realized something very young." "What?" "You can borrow courage from a book until you find your own." Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Finally he said quietly, "I wish someone had told me that." For the first time, Maya noticed something behind his smile. Loneliness. Not obvious, not dramatic, just familiar. "What about you?" she asked. "What made you love books?" He looked toward the rain outside before answering. "My grandmother." Maya smiled. "Another grandmother. The best kind." "What was she like?" He leaned back. "She lived in a guest house behind our family home." "You visited often?" "Every day." His smile faded. "The main house always felt too large." Maya frowned slightly. "You didn't like it?" "It never felt like home." He paused. "My parents traveled constantly." "I'm sorry. My grandmother practically raised me." "What did she teach you?" He looked at the shelves surrounding them. "That people who read deeply usually judge less quickly." Maya laughed softly. "She sounds like someone my grandmother would have loved." "I think they would have been friends." For a brief moment, both of them imagined it. 2 elderly women discussing books over tea while quietly changing the lives of the children they raised. Some images didn't need to become real to feel comforting. They eventually turned their attention to the literacy project. Ethan spread several notes across the table. "I've been thinking about mobile reading centers." Maya's eyes brightened. "For neighborhoods without easy library access." "Exactly." She leaned forward. "What if we included retired teachers as volunteers?" He immediately began writing. "What else?" "We could organize family reading nights." He nodded. "Keep going." Ideas flowed effortlessly between them. Neither interrupted. Neither tried to dominate the conversation. Each built upon the other's thoughts. By the end of an hour, the table was covered with handwritten notes. Ethan looked at them and smiled. "I don't think we've disagreed once. We probably will eventually." "I hope so." She looked surprised. "Why?" "Because good ideas become great ideas when kind people challenge each other honestly." Maya considered that. It wasn't just intelligent, it was humble. As they prepared to leave, Ethan noticed a small display near the register. Children's books. One little boy stood nearby, staring at a colorful hardcover. His mother quietly counted the money in her wallet. She sighed. "Maybe next month." The disappointment on the boy's face was immediate. Without saying a word, Ethan walked to the counter. He purchased the book. Then he handed it to the cashier. "Would you mind telling him someone wanted him to have it?" The cashier smiled knowingly. "I'd be happy to." Before the boy realized what had happened, Ethan was already opening the bookstore door. Maya had watched the entire exchange. "You didn't want him to know it was you." He shrugged. "Gratitude shouldn't always have an address." She stared at him for a long moment. Most generous people wanted recognition. Ethan seemed uncomfortable with it. As they stepped outside beneath the gray Seattle sky, Maya found herself remembering the ballroom from her dream. Only now, something felt different. The fear she had carried into that dream was beginning to loosen its grip, not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because someone had quietly reminded her that character often speaks loudest when no one is paying attention. She didn't know where this unexpected friendship would lead. She only knew that, for the first time in a very long while, she was looking forward to finding out. Saturday mornings quickly became Maya's favorite part of the week, not because they were quieter than the rest. In fact, they were usually the busiest. The community reading program had grown faster than anyone expected. Parents who had never visited the library before now arrived carrying toddlers on their hips and backpacks filled with borrowed books. High school students volunteered to read to younger children. Retired teachers offered writing workshops. Even local business owners had begun donating snacks and school supplies. Every week, another chair had to be added, then another, then another. Maya stood near the entrance watching children race toward the reading corner, as though they were arriving at an amusement park instead of a library. She smiled. This was why she loved her work. Not because of the books alone, because books had a way of bringing people together who otherwise might never have met. Looks like we'll need a bigger room soon. The familiar voice made her turn. Ethan stood just inside the doorway carrying 2 large cardboard boxes. She immediately noticed he wasn't dressed like the executives she occasionally saw on television. He wore faded blue jeans, brown boots, and a simple grey flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked less like the anonymous donor everyone imagined, and more like another volunteer. "You came. I said I would. You also brought half a bookstore." He laughed. "Only children's books." She stepped closer and peeked inside one of the boxes. Brand new copies, picture books, adventure novels, science books, biographies. Every age group had been considered. Maya gently lifted one from the box. "You bought all of these? They aren't mine." She looked up. "They belong to whichever child discovers them today." Something about the way he said it reminded her of Grace. People, not possessions. Opportunity, not ownership. She wondered how 2 people from completely different worlds could share the same quiet philosophy. Without another word, they carried the books together toward the reading room. Neither noticed Lily watching from behind one of the shelves. The little girl tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, what is it?" "I think Miss Brooks smiles differently now." Her mother glanced toward Maya and Ethan. She smiled knowingly. "I think you're right." By late morning, every chair in the room was occupied. Some children sat cross-legged on the carpet. Others leaned against bookshelves. Parents stood along the walls because there was nowhere else to sit. Maya stepped to the front with a picture book in her hands. "Today," she announced, "we're reading a story about courage." Several little hands shot into the air. One boy asked, "Is there a dragon?" Another girl asked, "Does somebody save the princess?" The room erupted in laughter. Maya pretended to think very seriously. "Actually," she looked around the room. "The story teaches us that sometimes the bravest people aren't the strongest." The children became unusually quiet. They're the ones who choose kindness when being unkind would be easier. Ethan watched from the back of the room. She wasn't just reading. She was teaching, without preaching, without trying to impress anyone. Every child listened because every child felt included. Daniel had once told Ethan that leadership wasn't measured by how many people followed you. It was measured by how many people felt seen because you showed up. Watching Maya, Ethan finally understood what Daniel had meant. After the reading session ended, children hurried toward the tables where volunteers helped them choose books to borrow. Lily approached Ethan carefully. "Excuse me?" He knelt so they were eye level. "Hi." She held up the adventure novel he had donated the week before. "I finished it." "Already?" She nodded proudly. "It made me want to write my own story." Ethan smiled. "What would it be about?" She thought for a long moment. "A girl who thinks she's ordinary. But she finds out she's actually changing people's lives." Ethan glanced across the room toward Maya. She was helping an elderly man download audiobooks onto his tablet. She had no idea anyone was watching her. No idea how many lives she quietly changed every single day. He looked back at Lily. "I think I'd read that story." The little girl grinned. "I'm going to write it." "I hope you do." She skipped away before he could say another word. For several seconds, Ethan remained where he was. Sometimes wisdom arrived from children before adults were ready to hear it. That afternoon, after the last family had left, Maya and Ethan carried empty boxes back to the storage room. The building felt strangely peaceful after hours of laughter. Maya leaned against one of the shelves. "I don't think I've ever seen this many children excited about reading." "They're excited because someone believed they deserved the opportunity." She looked at him. "No." He frowned slightly. "What?" "They're excited because someone showed up." He blinked. She continued quietly. "People remember who stayed." Neither of them spoke for several moments. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows again. Seattle seemed to speak best through rain. Ethan finally broke the silence. My grandmother used to tell me something. What was that? She said people rarely remember every word you say. Maya smiled. My grandmother said something similar. They remember how safe they felt standing beside you. Maya lowered her eyes. For reasons she couldn't explain, those words settled deep inside her heart. Not because they sounded romantic, because they sounded true. She realized that, in Ethan's company, she had stopped wondering whether she belonged. She simply did, and that frightened her a little. Because the more comfortable she became around him, the more she feared discovering something that would remind her they lived in completely different worlds. She didn't know it yet, but that discovery was closer than either of them imagined. Monday arrived with the quiet certainty of routine. The weekend's laughter had faded, replaced by the familiar rhythm of library carts rolling across polished floors and the soft rustle of turning pages. Maya had always believed libraries possessed a heartbeat of their own. Not loud, not hurried, just steady, like hope. She was shelving a stack of returned novels when Olivia hurried toward her, her expression brighter than usual. There you are. Maya looked up. You sound like you've been looking for me. I have. Olivia held up a cream-colored envelope, embossed with the Seattle Literacy Foundation's gold seal. It came this morning. Maya wiped her hands on her cardigan before accepting it. For me? Olivia nodded. Open it. Inside was an invitation, not to another gala, to a board meeting. She read it twice before looking up. They want me to speak? They don't just want you to speak, Olivia said. They want you to present your vision for expanding community literacy programs across Washington. Maya blinked. There must be some mistake. There isn't. I'm a librarian. Olivia smiled. Exactly. I don't know anything about addressing wealthy donors. You know everything about helping people. Those aren't the same thing. Olivia gently placed a hand on her shoulder. They should be. That evening, Maya spread the invitation across her kitchen table. Beside it lay a yellow legal pad filled with crossed-out ideas. She had been staring at the blank page for almost an hour. Nothing sounded right. Every sentence felt too formal, too rehearsed, too distant. She wanted people to understand why libraries mattered. Not through statistics, through stories. Yet finding the right word suddenly felt impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. How's your evening going? She hesitated before replying. I'm losing an argument with a blank piece of paper. His response came almost immediately. The paper usually wins if you keep staring at it. Coffee? She smiled despite herself. You always solve problems with coffee? Books first, coffee second. 20 minutes later, they were seated in their favorite corner of the neighborhood bookstore cafe. Maya slid the invitation across the table. They want me to give a speech. Ethan read it carefully. Congratulations. I haven't accepted. He looked up. Why? Because people like me don't give speeches at meetings like that. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. Can I ask you something? Of course. If one of the children from the reading program told you they weren't smart enough to chase their dream, I'd tell them they were wrong. Why? Because one opinion doesn't define who they are. He smiled gently. Then why are you letting yours define you? The question settled between them. Maya looked down at her untouched tea. I keep thinking they'll expect someone different. Different how? More successful. Ethan's expression softened. Maya, she met his eyes. I've watched you change an entire community simply by believing people deserve to be heard. He paused. That's success. She laughed quietly. You make it sound simple. No. He shook his head. I make it sound true. They left the cafe just before closing. Rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks shimmering beneath the streetlights. As they walked, they passed a man sitting alone outside a grocery store with a cardboard sign resting against his backpack. Most people walked by without slowing down. Maya stopped. So, did you have dinner? She asked him gently. The man offered a tired smile. Not yet. Without hesitation, Maya stepped inside the grocery store. A few minutes later, she returned carrying 2 warm sandwiches, fruit, and bottled water. There you go. The man's eyes widened. Thank you. She smiled. I hope tomorrow is a better day. As they continued walking, Ethan remained unusually quiet. Finally, Maya asked, What? You didn't ask whether he'd spend the money wisely. She shrugged. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for food. And he looked hungry. She slipped her hands into her coat pockets. My grandmother used to tell me something. What was that? When kindness starts asking too many questions, it usually stops being kindness. Ethan smiled. I wish I could have met her. So do I. For the first time since she'd lost Grace, Maya realized she could speak about her without feeling only grief. Now there was gratitude too. Gratitude that someone else's wisdom was still shaping the choices she made every day. As they reached the corner where their paths separated, Ethan stopped. "I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous." He laughed. "I'd like you to help me visit some of the schools we're hoping to support." "You want me to come with you?" "I don't need someone who understands spreadsheets." He looked at her with quiet sincerity. "I need someone who understands children." Maya felt her heart skip ever so slightly, not because of the invitation itself, but because he had noticed something about her that she hadn't realized anyone else saw. She nodded. "I'd like that." Neither of them realized someone across the street had been watching. A woman lowered her phone after quietly taking a photograph of Ethan and Maya standing together beneath the glow of the streetlights. She frowned. "Who's she?" The question disappeared into the night. Neither Ethan nor Maya heard it, but before long, the answer would begin changing both of their lives. The following Thursday morning began with sunshine. In Seattle, that alone felt like a small celebration. Golden light spilled across the library windows, painting warm rectangles across the hardwood floor. Dust floated lazily through the beams as Maya unlocked the front doors and welcomed the first visitors of the day. She had accepted the invitation to speak before the Literacy Foundation's board. The decision still frightened her, but it no longer felt impossible. Whenever doubt crept into her thoughts, she remembered Ethan's question. "Why are you letting your opinion define you?" It amazed her how a single sentence could quietly rearrange the way someone looked at themselves. Perhaps that was why words mattered. They could wound, they could heal. Sometimes they did both. Just before noon, Maya's phone vibrated. It was Ethan. "School visit today. I hope you haven't changed your mind." She smiled. "I'm already on my way." The elementary school sat on the edge of one of Seattle's oldest neighborhoods. Its brick walls had faded with time, and the playground equipment showed years of faithful use, but children's laughter filled every corner of the campus. That made the place feel richer than many buildings covered in glass and steel. The principal greeted them warmly. "You must be Maya." "I am. We've heard wonderful things." Maya glanced toward Ethan. He simply smiled without saying a word. As they toured the classrooms, teachers spoke honestly about their challenges. Some students shared books with classmates because there weren't enough copies. Others had never owned a single book at home. One teacher quietly admitted, "Sometimes we spend more time finding resources than teaching." Maya listened carefully. She wasn't searching for problems. She was searching for possibilities. By the end of the tour, her notebook was filled with ideas. Reading clubs, weekend family libraries, book donation drives, volunteer mentors. She had stopped writing down obstacles. She was writing down solutions. During recess, they sat on a bench overlooking the playground. Children chased one another across the grass, their laughter echoing through the afternoon air. A little boy sat alone beneath a tree, turning the pages of a worn paperback. Maya noticed him immediately. "He reminds me of myself." Ethan followed her gaze. "You were the child reading instead of playing?" She nodded. "I loved books." "You still do." They made sense. She watched the boy smile at something on the page. People can be confusing. Books? They usually tell you why someone behaves the way they do. Ethan laughed softly. "Real life isn't as generous." "No." She shook her head. "Real life often expects you to guess." They sat in comfortable silence. Not the awkward silence of strangers. The peaceful silence of two people who no longer felt pressured to fill every quiet moment with conversation. Before leaving, the principal handed Maya a folded drawing. "One of our students asked me to give you this." She unfolded it carefully. It showed a woman standing beside a bookshelf surrounded by smiling children. Above the drawing, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping us love books." Maya felt her throat tighten. She looked toward the classroom window, where a little girl waved shyly before disappearing inside. "I didn't do anything special." The principal smiled. "You showed up." Those two words stayed with Maya all afternoon. On the drive back to the city, Ethan remained unusually thoughtful. Finally, Maya asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I've attended hundreds of business meetings. And? I've never left one feeling the way I feel right now." She looked at him curiously. "How do you feel?" "Hopeful." She smiled. "I think children do that." "No." He glanced at her before returning his attention to the road. "I think you do." Maya looked out the window before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially ones that felt completely sincere. Later that evening, Ethan arrived at the headquarters of Callaway Technologies. The glass building overlooked Elliott Bay, its polished lobby reflecting the fading colors of sunset. Daniel was waiting outside Ethan's office with 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you'd be late." I was. Good day? Ethan nodded. The best I've had in months. Daniel handed him one of the cups. I looked into the literacy project. You didn't have to. I know. Daniel leaned against the doorway. But I was curious. About what? About the librarian. Ethan smiled. What about her? Daniel shrugged. I've known you for 15 years. So? I've never heard you talk about anyone the way you talk about her. Ethan looked through the office window toward the city below. I don't know where this is going. You don't have to. Daniel sipped his coffee. You just have to be honest when you get there. Across town, Maya sat at her dining table reviewing notes for her upcoming presentation. She had rewritten her opening sentence at least 6 times. Nothing sounded right. Frustrated, she closed the notebook. Her eyes drifted toward the framed photograph of Grace on the bookshelf. I wish you were here. The apartment remained quiet. Then her gaze landed on the old wooden sewing box. Almost without thinking, she opened it. Beneath the thread and fabric scraps was another folded piece of paper she had never noticed before. Her heartbeat quickened. Carefully, she unfolded it. Grace's familiar handwriting filled the page. But instead of a sewing tip or a favorite recipe, it began with 4 simple words. To the woman you'll become. Maya's breath caught. She slowly lowered herself into the chair, unaware that the letter in her hands was about to reveal something her grandmother had written years before her passing. Something that would change not only the way Maya saw herself, but the path she was about to choose. Maya's fingers trembled as she unfolded the yellowed sheet of paper. The edges had softened with age. A faint scent of lavender drifted from it, carrying memories of her grandmother's tiny house, where fresh flowers always sat on the kitchen windowsill no matter how difficult life became. She swallowed hard before reading aloud. To the woman you'll become. If you're reading this, then I've already gone home to the Lord, and you're probably wondering whether you're enough. Tears blurred the words almost immediately. Maya blinked until the ink became clear again. You have always worried too much about whether you belong. When you were 5, you thought you weren't fast enough because other children ran ahead of you. When you were 12, you believed you weren't pretty enough because someone laughed at your second-hand shoes. When you were 16, you cried because you couldn't afford the dress everyone else wore to the school dance. Every season of your life, the world tried to convince you that your value could be measured by something you could buy. Don't believe it. A tear slipped down Maya's cheek. She remembered that school dance. She had told everyone she didn't want to go. The truth was much simpler. She couldn't afford the dress. Instead, she had stayed home watching old movies with Grace, pretending it didn't matter. Grace had never pressured her to explain. She had simply made popcorn, wrapped a blanket around them both, and quietly whispered, "One day, you'll stop comparing your life to other people's highlights." At the time, Maya hadn't understood. Now she finally did. She continued reading. There will come a day when you'll walk into a room and wonder whether you deserve to be there. Go anyway. There will come a day when someone judges you before learning your name. Smile, anyway. There will also come a day when someone sees your heart before they notice your clothes. When that happens, don't run. Maya stopped reading. Her heartbeat echoed through the quiet apartment. She stared at those last 2 words. Don't run. Almost instinctively, Ethan's face appeared in her mind. The bookstore, the library, the children, the school, the gentle conversations that never made her feel small. She folded the letter against her chest. For the first time in years, she cried without trying to hide it. Not because she was hurting, because she finally understood how deeply she had been loved. Across the city, Ethan stood alone inside his office. Most of the building had emptied hours earlier. The lights of downtown Seattle stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like scattered stars. His phone buzzed. His assistant had forwarded next week's executive schedule. Board meetings, investor presentations, a charity banquet, a leadership summit in San Francisco. He scrolled through each appointment without much interest. Then another message appeared. Reminder, family legacy dinner. Saturday, 7 p.m. Attendance requested by the Calloway family board. Ethan sighed. Every year, the family hosted the same formal dinner. Every year, executives, investors, and distant relatives gathered beneath the illusion of togetherness. Every year, conversations revolved around profits, acquisitions, and reputation, rarely about people. Daniel knocked gently before entering. You've got that look again. What look? The one that says you'd rather organize 1,000 library books than attend another family dinner. Ethan smiled. Is it that obvious? Daniel laughed. Only to anyone who's known you longer than 5 minutes. Ethan looked back toward the city. I met people today who measure success by how many children learn to read. And? I think I've been attending the wrong meetings. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Maybe. Then he added, or maybe you finally started meeting the right people. The next afternoon, Maya arrived at the library, carrying Grace's letter inside her purse. She hadn't planned to bring it, yet leaving it behind somehow felt impossible. Throughout the day, whenever doubt tried creeping into her thoughts about the upcoming presentation, she quietly touched the folded paper, not to remind herself of what Grace had written, to remind herself that someone had believed in her long before she learned to believe in herself. Near closing time, Lily hurried toward the circulation desk carrying a notebook. "Miss Brooks," Maya smiled. "Did you write your story?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I finished the first chapter. May I see it?" The little girl handed over the notebook. Across the first page, written in oversized letters, was the title, "The Ordinary Girl Who Didn't Know She Was Extraordinary." Maya smiled so warmly that Lily beamed with pride. "It's beautiful," Maya said. "I learned it from you." The words caught Maya completely off guard. "From me?" Lily nodded. "You always tell us every story matters." She hesitated before adding, "So I thought, maybe every person does too." For a moment, Maya couldn't speak. She simply knelt and hugged the little girl. Children had a remarkable way of revealing truths adults spent years searching for. As Lily skipped away, Maya looked toward the window where the evening sun cast long shadows across the library floor. Maybe Grace had been right all along. Maybe worth wasn't something people earned. Maybe it was something they simply forgot they already had. And perhaps, the right people didn't give it to you. They gently reminded you it had been there all along. Outside, a sleek black car pulled quietly into the library parking lot. Ethan stepped out, carrying a small stack of books under one arm. He glanced toward the entrance and smiled. He had no idea that Maya had just read a letter capable of changing the course of her life. And Maya had no idea that before the week was over, she would accidentally discover the truth Ethan had never intended to hide. The truth that would make her question whether the quiet friendship growing between them could survive the enormous difference between their worlds. Ethan balanced the stack of books against one arm as he stepped through the library doors. The familiar scent of paper and polished wood greeted him, followed by the soft murmur of conversations between patrons. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, the place always made him breathe a little easier. His office overlooked one of the most beautiful skylines in Seattle. Yet somehow, this library felt richer. Not because of what it owned, because of what it gave away every single day. Maya looked up from the circulation desk and smiled. "You came back. I figured these belonged here more than they belonged in my office." He placed the books gently on the counter. She examined the titles. Classic novels, children's adventures, historical biographies. Every single one had won major literary awards. "You always choose good books." "I had help." "Who helped you?" "My grandmother." Maya looked up. "Still?" He smiled. "I still hear her recommendations every time I walk into a bookstore." Maya laughed softly. "I know exactly what you mean." She picked up one of the novels and carefully opened the cover. Inside was a handwritten note. "For whoever needs this story next." She looked at Ethan. "You write these?" "Sometimes." "Why?" He shrugged. "I like the idea that a stranger might open a book on exactly the day they need it." Maya closed the cover slowly. "You think about people a lot." "I try to." She smiled. "I've noticed." The afternoon passed more quickly than either of them expected. Together they sorted, donated books, repaired torn covers, and organized shelves that had gradually become overcrowded. They worked comfortably, not because they filled every silence, because they didn't feel obligated to. At one point, Maya climbed a small stepladder to reach the top shelf. A heavy history volume slipped from her hands. Before it hit the floor, Ethan caught it. She looked down at him. "You have good reflexes." He grinned. "I've had years of experience catching things." "What kinds of things?" He thought for a moment. "Mostly opportunities." She smiled. "I was expecting a much less philosophical answer." "I almost said coffee mugs." That made her laugh. The sound echoed gently through the quiet library. Several patrons looked up, not annoyed, simply smiling. Joy, Maya realized, had a way of becoming contagious. As closing time approached, Olivia Harper entered carrying several folders. "There you both are." She stopped when she noticed Ethan. "Oh." Her smile widened with obvious recognition. "Mr. Calloway." Maya frowned slightly. "Mr. Calloway?" Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Just enough for Maya to notice. "Good evening, Olivia. I didn't realize you were here." "We were finishing the donations." Olivia looked between them. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she said, "I've been trying to reach your assistant all afternoon about next week's foundation board meeting." The words hung in the air. Your assistant. Maya's eyes shifted toward Ethan. He remained calm. I'll have her call you tomorrow. Perfect. Olivia smiled warmly. And thank you again for increasing the foundation grant. It was the right thing to do. She nodded before disappearing toward the offices. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just different. Maya carefully placed another book onto the shelf. You never mentioned having an assistant. Ethan hesitated. I suppose I didn't. You also never mentioned people seem to know you. He looked down briefly. I know. She studied him. For the first time since they'd met, she felt as though there were pages missing from the story. Not lies. Just chapters she hadn't been allowed to read yet. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She looked surprised. For what? I didn't intend to keep anything from you. Then why didn't you tell me? He took a slow breath. Because I liked the way we met. She frowned. What do you mean? If I'd introduced myself differently. He searched for the right words. I'm not sure we would have had the same conversation. Maya remembered the hotel garden, the book, the questions, the laughter. No titles, no introductions, no expectations, only two strangers talking about stories. I wanted you to know me before everything else. She understood, or at least she wanted to. Still, questions continued gathering inside her. What exactly is everything else? Before Ethan could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Daniel. He silenced the call. I'm sorry. It's okay. No. He looked back at her. It isn't. He slipped the phone into his pocket. I should have told you sooner. Maya nodded slowly. Maybe. Neither of them noticed Arthur Donnelly walking past the front windows outside. He paused, smiled toward Ethan, then continued on his way. Maya watched the brief interaction. You know Arthur too? Ethan chuckled. A little. He told me once that he'd spent 30 years working with one of the most respected business leaders in America. I remember. He said that man cared more about people than profits. Ethan remained silent. Maya's curiosity deepened. One coincidence was ordinary. Two could still be explained. But lately, every road seemed to lead back to Ethan. That evening, after leaving the library, Maya stopped at a neighborhood grocery store. She wandered through the aisles absent-mindedly, replaying Olivia's words. Mr. Calloway, your assistant. Foundation board meeting. Something about the name felt strangely familiar. As she waited in the checkout line, the cover of a business magazine caught her eye. Normally she walked right past those displays. Tonight, she looked twice. Her breath caught. There, smiling from the front cover beneath bold black letters, was Ethan, wearing the same calm expression she had come to recognize. The headline read, Ethan Calloway, the billionaire CEO, quietly transforming American education. For several long seconds, Maya simply stared. The cashier spoke. Would you like to buy the magazine? She barely heard the question. Everything around her suddenly felt distant. The hotel garden, the bookstore, the library, the school. Every memory rearranged itself. Not because Ethan had pretended to be someone else, because she had never imagined he could be someone like that. She paid for the magazine without saying another word. Outside, twilight settled over Seattle. Maya stood beside her car, holding the magazine against her chest. The cool evening breeze stirred her hair, but she hardly noticed. Grace's letter echoed in her mind. There will come a day when someone sees your heart before they notice your clothes. When that happens... Don't run. She closed her eyes, then whispered to herself, I don't know if I can. Far across the city, Ethan stood in his office looking out over the skyline. For the first time in years, the success surrounding him felt strangely insignificant. He wasn't worried about tomorrow's board meeting, or the investors, or the company's quarterly report. He was worried about one thing, whether discovering who he really was would make Maya see him differently. And deep in his heart, he feared the answer might already be yes. Maya barely slept. The magazine lay on her coffee table long after midnight, its glossy cover catching the glow of the lamp beside her sofa. She had read the article 3 times. Each time, she hoped she had misunderstood. Each time, the facts remained the same. Ethan Calloway, founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, featured on magazine covers, invited to global leadership conferences, listed among the country's youngest billionaires. She closed the magazine again. What unsettled her wasn't his success. It was the silence. He had never once mentioned any of it. Not when they shared coffee. Not while carrying boxes of books. Not while sitting on a playground bench watching children laugh. He had spoken about stories, about kindness, about his grandmother. Never about private jets, boardrooms, or headlines. Maya leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? The question lingered in the quiet apartment. Then Grace's letter came to mind once more. When someone sees your heart before they notice your clothes, don't run. She sighed. I'm not running, Grandma. At least, she hoped she wasn't. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Callaway Technologies earlier than usual. The executive floor buzzed with activity. Assistants hurried between conference rooms. Investors from New York had arrived for the quarterly strategy meeting. Television crews were setting up in the lobby for an interview scheduled later that afternoon. Normally, Ethan would have been reviewing presentations. Instead, he stood at his office window, staring at the rain rolling down the glass. Daniel walked in carrying 2 coffees. I had a feeling you'd forget breakfast. Ethan accepted one with a grateful smile. Thanks. Daniel studied him for a moment. You look terrible. I slept. That's not what I asked. Ethan laughed quietly. I think Maya knows. Daniel nodded. How? Olivia recognized me at the library. And? She found a magazine last night. Daniel took a slow sip of coffee. So now comes the difficult part. Ethan looked over. Which is? Trust. I never lied to her. No. Daniel agreed. But sometimes people don't struggle with what you said. They struggle with what you didn't. Ethan knew he was right. Across town, Maya stood in front of her closet much longer than necessary. She had agreed to meet Ethan for lunch before either of them knew this conversation was coming. Part of her considered cancelling. It would be easier, safer. Another part remembered every child she had encouraged to face difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. She smiled to herself. Apparently, her own advice had come back to find her. An hour later, she walked toward the small botanical garden where they often met. The roses were in full bloom. Water trickled gently through a stone fountain. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful for the conversation waiting ahead. Ethan was already there. The moment he saw her, he stood. Neither moved immediately. Neither smiled the way they usually did. Finally, Maya spoke. I bought the magazine. He nodded once. I figured you might. You really are Ethan Callaway. I am the billionaire. A faint smile crossed his face. I've never introduced myself that way. I noticed. Silence settled between them. Not cold, just careful. Maya looked down at the magazine she had tucked beneath her arm. I kept wondering if I'd missed something. You didn't. Then why? He drew a slow breath. Do you remember the first night we met? She nodded. You asked what my favorite book was. And you answered. You never asked what I did for a living. I didn't think it mattered. It didn't. He took one small step closer. That's why I never interrupted. She looked at him. You should have told me eventually. I know. I would have still wanted to know. I know. I just... She struggled to find the words. I don't like feeling as though everyone else knew something about my friend except me. The word friend caught Ethan's attention. She hadn't said stranger. She hadn't said liar. She had called him her friend. I understand. He meant it. I wasn't trying to impress you. You definitely failed at that. He blinked. Then Maya smiled for the first time that morning. I liked the man who carried heavy boxes because the volunteers were tired. I liked the man who wrote notes inside library books. I liked the man who sat on a tiny classroom chair while first graders explained dinosaurs to him. She looked directly into his eyes. I don't know what to do with the billionaire. Ethan laughed softly. Neither do I some days. She couldn't help laughing too. The tension eased just enough for both of them to breathe. They found a quiet bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. For nearly an hour, Ethan answered every question Maya asked. He spoke about building the company with 3 friends in a rented warehouse, about sleeping on office couches, about losing his grandmother just months before the business finally succeeded, about promising himself that if he ever had more than enough, he would spend the rest of his life creating opportunities for other people. I never wanted money to become my identity, he said. I've spent years trying to make sure it doesn't. Maya listened carefully, not to his accomplishments, to his reasons. By the end of the conversation, she realized something important. The magazine had described Ethan's achievements. It hadn't described Ethan. Those were 2 very different things. As they stood to leave, Maya looked at him thoughtfully. I have one condition. He raised an eyebrow. For what? For continuing this friendship. I'm listening. No more surprises. He smiled. Agreed. And if there's something important, I'll tell you. She extended her hand. Deal? Instead of shaking it immediately, Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then he gently took her hand. Deal. Neither noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Inside, a woman lowered an expensive camera after taking several photographs. She zoomed in on the last image. Ethan, holding Maya's hand beneath the cherry blossoms. The woman smiled to herself. Well, I'm sure the Calloway family will find this interesting. She started the engine and drove away. Neither Ethan nor Maya had any idea that the photographs were already on their way to the one family Ethan had spent years trying to keep away from the quiet life he had begun building with Maya. And by the time they discovered it, keeping their friendship simple would no longer be an option. Before we continue, take a moment to think about this. If you discovered that someone you deeply respected had been hiding something this important, would you feel betrayed, or would you try to understand why they kept it from you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you would do if you were in Maya's position. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Because in the next chapter, the photographs have reached Ethan's powerful family, and the quiet life he and Maya have been building is about to face its biggest challenge yet. The photographs arrived just before breakfast. Margaret Calloway rarely looked through the stack of newspapers and correspondence delivered to the family estate herself. That responsibility usually belonged to her assistant. But Saturday mornings were different. She preferred silence. No meetings, no executives. Just tea, fresh fruit, and the view from the estate's sprawling gardens overlooking Puget Sound. She had just unfolded the financial section when another envelope caught her attention. There was no return address. Only the Calloway family crest neatly typed across the front. Curious, she opened it. Several glossy photographs slid onto the breakfast table. Her expression remained calm as she examined the first, then the second, then the third. Each showed Ethan. Not at a corporate event, not standing beside world leaders, not speaking to investors. He was smiling at a woman in a botanical garden. In another photograph, they were carrying boxes into a library together. In another, they stood beneath blooming cherry blossoms, his hand gently holding hers. Margaret studied the young woman carefully. Simple cardigan, no designer handbag, no recognizable face from Seattle's social circles. She turned one of the photographs over. A single sentence had been written in black ink. Find out who she is before everyone else does. Margaret slowly placed the photographs back on the table. Her husband, Richard Calloway, entered the dining room moments later. You look unusually serious. Without a word, she slid one of the photographs across the table. Richard adjusted his glasses. Who's the woman? I was hoping you might know. He examined the image for another moment before shaking his head. No. Margaret folded her hands. Neither do I. Richard looked toward his wife. And that's exactly what concerns you. She didn't deny it. The media has followed Ethan for years. He has always been careful. He values his privacy. Richard nodded. So do we. Margaret picked up another photograph. He looks happy. It was an observation rather than a criticism. Richard noticed it too. I haven't seen him smile like that in a long time. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Margaret rang the small silver bell beside her teacup. Her assistant appeared almost immediately. Good morning, Mrs. Calloway. I need information. The assistant glanced toward the photographs. About her? Everything. Across town, Maya was completely unaware that strangers had begun asking questions about her life. Instead, she stood before a mirror in her apartment, practicing the opening lines of her presentation. She cleared her throat. Good afternoon, everyone. She stopped. Too formal. She tried again. When I was little. She frowned. Too personal. Another attempt. Every child deserves. Still not right. Frustrated, she closed her notebook. I've officially forgotten how to speak. A soft knock sounded at her apartment door. When she opened it, she found Olivia smiling with 2 cups of coffee. I had a feeling you'd be rehearsing. Maya laughed. Was it that obvious? I know you. Olivia stepped inside. And I also know you're overthinking. I don't know how to talk to people who donate millions of dollars. Olivia handed her a cup. Talk to them the same way you talk to everyone else. They're important. Olivia smiled warmly. So are the children you're speaking for. Those words settled Maya's nerves more than any rehearsal could have. Meanwhile, Ethan was spending the morning at the community center helping volunteers assemble bookshelves for the expanding literacy program. He wore work gloves, jeans, and a faded navy t-shirt. A teenage volunteer looked at him curiously. Has anyone ever told you that you look like Ethan Calloway? Daniel, who had been tightening bolts nearby, nearly dropped his wrench. Ethan smiled without looking up. I've heard that before. The teenager laughed. I guess rich CEOs don't build furniture on weekends. No, Ethan replied. They usually hire someone much better at it. Everyone laughed. Daniel waited until the teenager walked away before leaning closer. You dodged that one. I wasn't exactly lying. No, Daniel grinned. You just left out about $4 billion worth of information. Ethan shook his head with a laugh. I'm trying to keep this place about books, not headlines. Daniel's smile softened. I know. He looked toward the children painting colorful signs that read, Reading changes lives. I just hope the headlines don't find you anyway. By Monday afternoon, the Literacy Foundation headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Board members from across the state filled the conference room. Educators, business leaders, philanthropists, community organizers. Maya waited quietly outside the auditorium, reviewing her notes one last time. Her hands trembled slightly. She reached into her purse. Grace's letter was still there. She gently touched the folded paper. Almost instantly, her breathing slowed. A volunteer opened the door. They're ready for you. Maya nodded. As she stepped inside, more than 100 people turned toward the stage. Bright lights reflected off polished wood. Microphones stood waiting at the podium. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Then she remembered something Ethan had once said. Truth doesn't have to sound impressive. She smiled to herself. Maybe that was enough. She walked confidently to the podium. She looked across the room. Instead of imagining executives and donors, she imagined Lily, the little boy reading beneath the tree. Parents discovering books with their children. Everything she loved about the library. Suddenly, she wasn't nervous anymore. She began. When I was 8 years old. The room grew completely silent, not because her voice was loud, because every word sounded real. Near the back of the auditorium, Ethan slipped quietly through a side entrance. He had promised he would attend without distracting her. So, he chose the last row. He smiled with quiet pride as Maya spoke. She wasn't reading from notes anymore. She was speaking from her heart. Several board members nodded. Others wiped discreet tears from their eyes. Even the most reserved executives leaned forward in their seats. Halfway through the presentation, Ethan noticed movement near the entrance. Margaret Calloway stepped inside, elegant as always. Composed, observant. Her eyes moved across the room until they settled on the woman standing at the podium. She didn't recognize Maya from reputation. She recognized her immediately from the photographs. Margaret remained standing in the shadows, saying nothing. She watched Maya finish to a standing ovation. As the applause filled the room, Margaret's expression remained impossible to read. Only one thought crossed her mind. So, this is the woman who has my son's attention. She turned and quietly left before Ethan ever noticed she had been there. Outside, she instructed her driver to start the car. For the first time, her curiosity had become something much more personal. She intended to meet Maya Brooks. And she intended to decide for herself whether this librarian belonged anywhere near the Calloway family. The applause lingered long after Maya stepped away from the podium. She wasn't sure how she had made it through the speech. At some point, the carefully prepared notes in her hands had become unnecessary. She had spoken about Lily writing her first story, about the little boy who treated books like treasures, about parents who apologized because they couldn't afford to buy novels for their children. She hadn't quoted statistics. She had shared lives, and somehow, that had been enough. As attendees gathered around her to offer congratulations, Maya accepted every compliment with the same quiet humility. I'm glad the stories resonated. They weren't just stories, one board member replied. They were reminders. Across the room, Ethan watched without interrupting. He wanted this moment to belong entirely to her. She had earned it. Not because of who she knew, because of who she was. Eventually the crowd began to thin. Olivia hurried over, nearly glowing with excitement. I told you. Maya laughed. You told me a lot of things. I told you they'd listen. They did. No. Olivia shook her head with a grin. They believed you. Before Maya could answer, Arthur Donnelly approached. His silver hair caught the afternoon light as he extended his hand. Miss Brooks, it's good to see you again. The pleasure is mine. Arthur smiled warmly. I've attended these meetings for almost 30 years. He paused thoughtfully. I've heard remarkable speakers, famous authors, university presidents, state officials. He looked directly at Maya. Today, I heard a librarian. And somehow. He smiled. I learned the most. Maya felt herself blush. Thank you. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a business card. I chair the Seattle Community Education Council. She accepted it politely. We're creating a statewide literacy initiative. Her eyebrows lifted. We'd like your advice. My advice? We don't need another executive. Arthur smiled. We need someone who remembers why reading matters. Maya glanced at Ethan almost instinctively. He offered only an encouraging nod. This achievement was hers, not his. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Maya walked slowly through the nearby botanical gardens. Neither felt the need to rush. The afternoon sun filtered through towering maple trees, casting shifting patterns across the winding paths. I owe you an apology, Ethan said. She looked over. For what? I missed the beginning of your speech. She smiled. You made it before the important part. I heard the standing ovation. I wish you hadn't. He laughed. Why? I don't like being the center of attention. You hid that remarkably well. I was pretending. You fooled everyone. She looked down at the flowers lining the path. Not everyone. What do you mean? I kept imagining you sitting in the audience. He looked surprised. Really? It made me less nervous. He smiled quietly. I'm honored. So am I. The words escaped before she had time to think. She stopped walking. So are you? She laughed nervously. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. He looked at her with the same calm sincerity she had come to trust. I'm honored too. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt peaceful. Several hundred yards away, another pair of eyes followed them. Margaret Calloway sat inside the back seat of a parked sedan, watching through the partially lowered window. Her assistant held a folder. We've completed the preliminary background report. Margaret accepted it without looking away from the couple. Read it. Name, Maya Brooks. Occupation, librarian. Age, 30. No criminal record. No debt beyond a modest mortgage. Volunteers approximately 15 hours each week. Cares for community reading programs. Raised by her grandmother after losing both parents in childhood. Margaret remained silent. The assistant continued. By every measurable standard. He hesitated. She appears to be exceptionally well respected. Margaret finally looked down at the folder. There were no scandals, no hidden motives, no suspicious financial history. Only recommendation letters, volunteer awards, thank you notes from schools, even handwritten letters from parents praising Maya's kindness. Margaret closed the folder. Interesting. The assistant waited. Would you like us to continue investigating? Margaret considered the question carefully. No. The assistant looked surprised. No? I'd rather meet her myself. That evening, Maya returned home physically exhausted, but emotionally lighter than she had felt in years. As she unlocked her apartment door, she noticed a small package resting against the frame. There was no postage, no shipping label, only her name written neatly across the top. Inside was a beautifully bound leather journal. The first page contained a handwritten message. Every community needs someone willing to tell its stories. Thank you for telling ours. There was no signature, but tucked inside the back cover was a familiar bookstore receipt. Maya smiled. Ethan. She traced the embossed cover with her fingertips. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gift he would choose. Not expensive for the sake of being impressive, meaningful. She carried the journal to her desk and opened to the first blank page. After several moments of thought, she began to write. Today I learned that courage doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes, it simply sounds honest. Across the city, Ethan arrived home to find his house unusually quiet. He loosened his tie and placed his keys on the entry table. A single envelope rested beside them. Cream-colored, no stamp, only his name. His expression immediately changed. He recognized the stationery. Calloway Estate. Inside was a brief, handwritten note. Dinner, Wednesday, 7 o'clock. No excuses. Mother. Ethan read it twice. He didn't need to wonder why she suddenly wanted to see him. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Thank you for the journal. It's probably the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. A smile spread across his face despite the note still in his hand. He replied, You earned every page. He stared at the message for a moment before slipping his phone back into his pocket. Then his eyes returned to his mother's invitation. Two worlds that had remained comfortably separate were beginning to move toward each other, and Ethan had a feeling that very soon, he would have to decide whether he was willing to stand between them. Wednesday arrived wrapped in grey clouds and a steady drizzle that seemed determined to linger over Seattle. Maya spent the morning helping Lily choose books for the library's newest reading challenge. I can't decide, Lily said, holding one mystery novel in one hand and a fantasy adventure in the other. Maya smiled. Why choose? I can borrow both? You can borrow as many stories as your backpack can carry. Lily's eyes lit up. I wish life worked like libraries. What do you mean? I wish people got unlimited chances too. Maya paused. Children had an uncanny ability to say the kinds of things adults spent years trying to understand. I think, Maya replied gently, we do get a lot of chances. We just don't always notice them. Lily nodded thoughtfully before skipping toward the checkout desk. As Maya watched her leave, her phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. Big family dinner tonight. If I disappear for a few hours, don't assume I've been kidnapped. She laughed quietly. Should I be worried? A few seconds later, his reply appeared. Only if I start wearing expensive cufflinks on purpose. Her smile widened. Good luck. He responded with a single line. I'll probably need it. The Callaway estate stood on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound, surrounded by towering evergreens and perfectly manicured gardens. It was elegant, without being loud. Every stone, every hedge, every piece of artwork reflected generations of wealth. Ethan had grown up there. Yet every time he drove through the iron gates, he felt like a guest. A valet opened his car door. Good evening, Mr. Callaway. Good evening. Inside, the dining room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Richard Callaway stood near the fireplace speaking with Ethan's older cousin, Jonathan. Margaret was arranging place cards at the dining table. She looked up as Ethan entered. You're on time. I didn't want to disappoint you. A faint smile crossed her face. You rarely do. After greeting his father and a few relatives, Ethan took his seat. Dinner began with polite conversation. The latest business acquisitions, international markets, a charity auction, a museum renovation. The topics changed effortlessly, but all revolved around influence and reputation. Ethan answered when spoken to, but otherwise remained unusually quiet. Margaret noticed. She always noticed. As dessert was served, she gently placed her fork on the plate. I attended the Literacy Foundation presentation on Monday. The room became still. Ethan looked up. You were there? I was. You didn't say hello. I wasn't there to see you. Her words weren't harsh. They were simply honest. I wanted to hear Maya Brooks speak. Jonathan glanced curiously between them. The librarian? Margaret nodded once. The librarian. Ethan didn't respond immediately. What did you think? He finally asked. Margaret folded her hands. I expected someone seeking attention. She paused. I found someone avoiding it. Richard looked interested. You spoke with her? No. I watched. And? Margaret's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She reminded me of someone. Who? Margaret looked directly at Ethan. Your grandmother. Silence settled over the room. No one spoke for several long moments. The comparison carried weight. Eleanor Callaway had been the heart of the family. Even decades later, everyone still measured kindness against her example. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. I think Grandma would have liked Maya. I believe she would have. Margaret's voice remained calm. But admiration and compatibility are not always the same thing. There it was. The conversation Ethan had expected. He met his mother's gaze. Are we talking about Maya now? We are. Richard quietly set down his coffee. Jonathan suddenly found the artwork on the opposite wall fascinating. No one interrupted. Margaret continued. You've protected your private life for years. Yes. You've never introduced anyone to this family. No. But from the moment I saw those photographs, she stopped. I realized this woman matters to you. Ethan didn't deny it. She does. Margaret nodded. I thought so. She leaned back slightly. So let me ask you something. Go ahead. Does she know what your life truly looks like? She does now. And does she understand what being close to this family would mean? Ethan answered honestly. Probably not. Margaret sighed. Neither do you. Across town, Maya was locking the library for the evening when Arthur Donnelly approached. I hope I'm not keeping you. Not at all. Arthur held a large envelope. The council voted unanimously. Maya looked puzzled. For what? We'd like to appoint you as Director of Community Outreach for the statewide literacy initiative. She blinked. I don't understand. You'd continue working with libraries. He smiled. But your programs would expand across the entire state. Maya stared at the letter without opening it. I've never managed something that large. Arthur chuckled. Neither had I when someone first believed in me. He handed her the envelope. Sometimes people lend us confidence until we're ready to carry our own. Maya felt her throat tighten. This is an incredible opportunity. It is. But don't answer tonight. Why not? Because life-changing decisions deserve a good night's sleep. She smiled. My grandmother used to say almost the same thing. Then she sounds like a very wise woman. Arthur tipped his hat before walking toward his car. Maya stood alone beneath the library lights, holding the envelope against her chest. Everything in her life seemed to be changing at once. New opportunities, new responsibilities, new feelings she wasn't entirely sure how to name. Late that evening, Ethan parked outside Maya's apartment building. He hadn't planned to stop. He only wanted to make sure the lights in her apartment were on after his difficult dinner. He looked up. Warm light glowed from her living room window. Without realizing it, he smiled. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. Invite Maya to lunch on Sunday. He frowned. A second message followed almost immediately. I'd like to meet the woman who reminded me of your grandmother. Ethan read the messages twice. He knew his mother well enough to understand that this wasn't a casual invitation. It was an evaluation, a test, and although he trusted Maya completely, he wasn't sure he trusted the world she was about to step into. Upstairs, Maya opened Arthur's envelope for the first time. The offer letter slipped into her hands. As she began reading, another sheet of paper fell unnoticed onto the floor. She didn't see it, but if she had picked it up that night, she would have discovered a name that connected the statewide literacy initiative to the Callaway Foundation in a way she never expected. For now, however, fate seemed content to keep one more secret. Just a little longer. Sunlight filtered through Maya's apartment windows the following morning, catching the edge of the unopened letter that had slipped beneath her desk the night before. She carried a mug of coffee to the table, intending to review Arthur's offer one more time. As she gathered the papers together, a single sheet slid from beneath the chair. She bent to pick it up. At the bottom of the page, beneath the official letterhead of the Seattle Community Education Council, appeared another name. Strategic Partner, the Callaway Foundation. Maya read the line twice, then a third time. A slow realization settled over her. Ethan had never once mentioned that his foundation was involved. She wasn't sure whether to smile or sigh. He really does have a habit of leaving out important details, she murmured. Yet this time, the feeling was different. She didn't feel hurt. She felt understood. He had never tried to take credit for the opportunity. If anything, he had stepped farther into the background so her work could stand on its own. That mattered, more than she expected. The library was unusually lively that afternoon. Word of Maya's presentation had spread through the community. Parents stopped to congratulate her. Teachers thanked her for speaking on behalf of schools. Even regular patrons who normally exchanged only polite greetings paused to shake her hand. You made us proud, an elderly gentleman said, before checking out his weekly stack of mystery novels. Maya smiled. I just told the truth. That's exactly why people listened. She carried those words with her as she arranged a display of children's books near the entrance. Sometimes the simplest truths traveled the farthest. Near closing time, Ethan walked through the front doors carrying a paper bag from their favorite cafe. I come bearing peace offerings. Maya looked up from the circulation desk. You mean coffee? I've learned they're basically the same thing. She laughed. They're getting dangerously close. He handed her one of the cups. I thought you might need this. She accepted it with a grateful smile. Perfect timing. They settled into 2 chairs near the reading corner after the last visitors had left. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt familiar, comfortable. Finally, Maya reached into her bag and placed the partnership document on the table between them. Ethan glanced down. His expression shifted. You saw it. I did. I was going to tell you. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do? I've started noticing something. And what's that? You don't hide things because you're ashamed. She held his gaze. You hide them because you don't want them changing the way people see someone else. He remained silent. She continued gently. You never mentioned the Callaway Foundation because you didn't want me thinking my work mattered only because of you. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. I wanted the council to choose you. They did. They would have chosen you, even if we'd never met. Maya studied him for a long moment. Thank you. For what? For believing that before I did. Their conversation drifted naturally from books to schools, from schools to childhood memories. Eventually, Maya unfolded Arthur's offer letter. I haven't answered yet. Ethan read the first page carefully before handing it back. What are you afraid of? She smiled knowingly. You always ask difficult questions. They usually lead to honest answers. She stared at the letter. I'm afraid I'll disappoint people. You will. She blinked. What? He smiled. Eventually. She looked almost offended. I'm serious. So am I. He leaned forward slightly. If you take this job, someone will disagree with one of your decisions. Someone will criticize you. Someone will tell you they could have done it better. He shrugged gently. That's part of leading. She considered his words. So, how do you deal with that? I ask myself one question. What is it? When all the noise fades, can I still sleep knowing I acted with integrity? He paused. If the answer is yes, I keep going. Maya lowered her eyes. Grace had once said something almost identical. She smiled to herself. Perhaps wisdom sounded the same no matter who spoke it. Across the city, Margaret Calloway stood in Eleanor Calloway's old rose garden. The late afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through the estate. Richard joined her quietly. You've been out here for an hour. I've been thinking. About Ethan? She nodded. And Maya. Richard folded his hands behind his back. You seem conflicted. I expected to find someone chasing our family's name. Instead, she looked toward the roses. I found a woman building her own. Richard smiled. That's a good thing. It should be. But, Margaret sighed, I know what this family can do to good people. For the first time in years, uncertainty crossed her face. I don't want history repeating itself. Richard understood immediately. They weren't talking about Ethan anymore. They were talking about Eleanor, a woman whose kindness had often been mistaken for weakness by people who valued status above character. Margaret had spent decades protecting the family from outsiders. Now she wondered whether, in doing so, she had also protected them from the very people who might have made them better. I invited Maya to lunch tomorrow, she said quietly. Richard nodded. Try not to judge her before dessert. Margaret couldn't help smiling. No promises. The following afternoon, Maya stood outside a small neighborhood cafe, checking the time on her phone. Ethan approached from across the street. You look nervous. I am. Arthur's offer. She nodded. And something else. Before she could explain, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His mother's name. He read the message silently. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock. The estate. I hope Maya accepts the invitation. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. What is it? Maya asked. Ethan looked at her, weighing his words carefully. There's someone I'd like you to meet. She tilted her head. Who? He took a slow breath. My mother. For a heartbeat, the sounds of the city seemed to disappear. Maya searched his face. Is this important? Ethan smiled gently. I think it might be the beginning of something. Neither of them could know whether that something would become acceptance, or the greatest obstacle either of them had ever faced. Maya spent the rest of the afternoon pretending she wasn't thinking about Sunday. It didn't work. Every time she returned a book to its shelf, she imagined another version of the same question. What should I wear? What if she doesn't like me? What if I say the wrong thing? By the time she locked the library for the evening, she had exhausted herself with possibilities that hadn't even happened. As she stepped outside, Olivia was waiting beside her car. You have that look. Maya sighed. What look? The one that says your brain has been arguing with itself all day. Maya laughed. Is it really that obvious? To someone who's known you for 6 years? Olivia smiled. Very. They decided to walk to a nearby cafe instead of driving home immediately. Once they had settled into a quiet booth, Maya wrapped both hands around a mug of hot tea. Ethan wants me to meet his mother. Olivia raised an eyebrow. That's a big step. I know. You don't sound excited. I am. Maya hesitated. I'm also terrified. Olivia leaned forward. Tell me something. What? Are you afraid because she's Ethan's mother? Or because she's a Calloway? Maya looked down. I don't know. Yes, you do. After a long pause, Maya admitted quietly. I've never belonged in places like that. Olivia smiled gently. Maybe, but you're not going there because you belong to their world. She reached across the table. You're going because Ethan believes you belong in his. Those words settled over Maya like a warm blanket. She hadn't thought about it that way. Across town, Ethan stood in the library that had once belonged to his grandmother. Unlike the modern design of the rest of the estate, this room had been preserved exactly as Eleanor Calloway left it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a worn leather reading chair, fresh flowers beside the window. Richard stepped quietly into the room. I thought I'd find you here. Ethan smiled faintly. I needed to think. His father walked slowly around the room, running a hand along the polished shelves. Your grandmother loved this room. I know. She believed books introduced people long before they introduced themselves. Ethan looked toward the old reading chair. That's probably why I liked Maya the first night we met. Richard nodded knowingly. You met through a conversation. Not a resume. Not a bank account. Not a headline. Ethan sighed. I'm worried. About tomorrow. About what this family expects. Richard studied his son for a moment. You know what I expect? Ethan looked up. I expect you to choose someone who makes you a better man. He smiled. I don't particularly care what surname she has. Emotion flickered across Ethan's face. His father wasn't known for long speeches, but when Richard spoke from the heart, every word mattered. Sunday arrived brighter than expected. The rain had finally given Seattle a day of blue skies. Maya stood in front of her bedroom mirror wearing a simple navy blue dress that Grace had once helped her tailor. It wasn't expensive. It never had been. But it fit perfectly. She fastened a small silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Nothing more. No elaborate jewelry. No designer accessories. She looked at herself one last time. I hope you'd approve, Grandma. The apartment remained quiet. Yet somehow, she felt less alone. A knock sounded at the door. Ethan stood outside, holding a small bouquet of white daisies. Maya smiled. You brought flowers? They're not for you. She laughed. They're not? They're for your grandmother. He nodded toward the necklace. I figured she'd still be coming with us today. For several seconds Maya couldn't speak. Then she accepted the flowers carefully. Thank you. They seemed appropriate. They are. No one had ever thought to honor Grace in such a simple, thoughtful way. It was a gesture that cost very little, yet meant everything. The drive to the Calloway estate passed more quietly than usual. Not because conversation was difficult, because both of them understood the importance of what lay ahead. As the iron gates came into view, Maya looked out the window. The estate was beautiful. Rolling gardens stretched toward the water. Ancient oak trees lined the driveway. The house itself stood with quiet elegance rather than extravagance. It doesn't feel the way I imagined. Ethan glanced at her. How did you imagine it? Cold. And? It isn't. He smiled. My grandmother would have been pleased to hear that. When the car stopped beneath the front entrance, Ethan turned toward her. You don't have to impress anyone today. I'm still going to try. He shook his head gently. No. He offered a reassuring smile. Just be the woman who convinced an entire room of strangers to believe in children's stories. That's the only person I invited. Maya took a slow, steady breath. I can do that. I know you can. The front door opened before they reached it. Margaret Calloway stood waiting at the entrance. Elegant, in a cream-colored dress, composed as ever, yet wearing a warm expression Maya hadn't expected. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Margaret's eyes fell to the bouquet of daisies in Maya's hands. Those are beautiful, she said. Maya smiled politely. They're for someone who taught me that kindness is never out of fashion. Margaret looked at Ethan, then back at Maya. Something softened in her expression. Please, she said, stepping aside. Welcome to our home. As Maya crossed the threshold, neither woman realized that this first meeting would quietly reshape both of their lives, not through confrontation, but through a discovery neither of them had anticipated waiting inside the old library at the heart of the Calloway estate. The entrance hall was quieter than Maya expected. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating polished hardwood floors that reflected generations of careful preservation rather than extravagance. Portraits of the Calloway family lined the walls, each framed in dark walnut. Instead of making Maya feel intimidated, they made her wonder about the lives behind the painted smiles. Margaret noticed where her attention had settled. Every portrait tells part of the family's story. Maya smiled politely. I suppose every family has one. They do. Margaret glanced briefly toward a portrait of an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. The important question is whether people remember the story correctly. There was something in her voice that made Maya look again at the painting. The woman's smile felt familiar. Not because Maya had seen her before, because it reminded her of Grace, gentle, patient, the kind of face that invited conversation. Richard entered from the adjoining room with an easy smile. You must be Maya. She extended her hand. It's nice to finally meet you. Richard shook it warmly. The pleasure is ours. Unlike the formal introductions Maya had rehearsed in her mind, Richard's greeting felt refreshingly ordinary. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. Maya glanced toward Ethan, who looked quietly relieved. Margaret noticed the exchange, but said nothing. Instead, she gestured toward a sitting room overlooking the gardens. I thought we'd have lunch on the terrace. The table had been set simply. Fresh flowers, homemade bread, soup, grilled vegetables, roasted salmon. Nothing about the meal felt designed to impress. It felt designed to be shared. As everyone took their seats, conversation flowed naturally. Richard asked about the library. Margaret listened more than she spoke. Ethan occasionally added a detail, but mostly allowed Maya to answer for herself. I heard your presentation received a standing ovation, Richard said. Maya smiled modestly. I think people were applauding the children I spoke about. Margaret looked at her thoughtfully. Not yourself? I was simply the one holding the microphone. Margaret folded her napkin carefully. That's an unusual perspective. My grandmother taught me that if a bridge spends all its time asking people to admire it, she smiled, it forgets its purpose is helping them cross. For the first time since lunch began, Margaret laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It was genuine. Richard exchanged a subtle glance with Ethan. Neither of them had heard Margaret laugh like that with a guest in years. After dessert, Richard excused himself to take an important phone call. Margaret stood. Ethan, would you mind helping your father? Of course. As the two men disappeared inside the house, Maya realized she and Margaret had been intentionally left alone. The silence lasted only a moment. Would you care to walk through the gardens? I'd love to. The rose garden stretched toward the cliffs overlooking Puget Sound. Every path had been carefully maintained, yet the flowers themselves were allowed to bloom naturally. Nothing looked overly controlled. My mother-in-law designed this garden, Margaret said. Eleanor? Margaret looked surprised. You know her name? Ethan talks about her often. A faint smile crossed Margaret's face. That doesn't surprise me. They continued walking. After several moments, Margaret asked quietly, Tell me about your grandmother. Maya's expression softened immediately. Grace raised me. I'm sorry for your loss. So am I. She looked toward the roses. But I'm grateful too. What are you grateful for? I never had to wonder whether I was loved. Margaret stopped walking. Those words lingered between them. I've known people who had everything money could buy, Maya continued. They would have traded all of it for that certainty. Margaret looked away toward the water. So have I. Inside the house, Ethan paced slowly across the study. Richard watched him with an amused expression. You're wearing a groove into the carpet. I'm trying not to interrupt. They're just talking. I know. You trust Maya. Completely. You trust your mother. Ethan hesitated. Mostly. Richard chuckled. That's probably the most honest answer you've given all week. Ethan smiled, despite himself. What if this goes badly? Richard shrugged. Then we'll deal with it. And if it goes well? His father smiled. Then perhaps this family gets something it has needed for a very long time. What's that? Richard looked toward the garden outside. Someone who reminds us what matters. Back among the roses, Margaret led Maya to a weathered wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. There was a time, Margaret said quietly, when I believed success could solve almost every problem. Maya listened without interrupting. I spent years protecting this family. She looked down at her hands. I became so focused on guarding what we had that I sometimes forgot to appreciate who we were becoming. Maya considered her words carefully. My grandmother used to say fear is a very convincing storyteller. Margaret looked up. What did she mean? It tells us terrible endings before the story has even begun. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Margaret smiled. I owe you an apology. Maya looked surprised. For what? When I first saw the photographs of you and Ethan. She sighed softly. I assumed you were interested in the Calloway name. And now? I think you're one of the few people who forgets it exists. Maya laughed quietly. Sometimes I still do. Margaret smiled. I know. She reached into her pocket and removed a small antique key. I'd like to show you something. Curious, Maya followed her back into the house. They walked through a quiet hallway until Margaret stopped before a heavy oak door. She unlocked it. The room beyond was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, sunlight spilling across worn wooden floors. Thousands of books collected over decades. It belonged to Eleanor, Margaret said softly. Maya stepped inside almost reverently. It feels... She searched for the right word. Alive. Margaret watched as Maya ran her fingertips lightly along the shelves, not possessively but with unmistakable respect. She didn't notice the antique globe. She didn't admire the expensive first editions. Instead, she picked up a children's book whose corners had been lovingly repaired countless times. This one was read often, Maya whispered. Margaret blinked. How can you tell? The spine has been mended 3 different times. She smiled. Someone loved sharing this story. Margaret felt something shift inside her. Most visitors noticed the value of the collection. Maya noticed the evidence of love. At that moment, Margaret understood why Ethan had fallen in love with her long before he ever realized it himself. Standing quietly in the doorway, Ethan watched Maya smiling over a worn children's book. He hadn't heard his mother speak those words, but he saw the look in her eyes. For the first time since bringing Maya into his family's world, hope outweighed fear. Neither of them realized, however, that a journalist waiting outside the estate gates had just photographed Maya leaving the Calloway Library. By morning, Whispers about the mysterious woman beside America's most private billionaire would begin spreading far beyond Seattle. And this time, keeping their story private would no longer be possible. The first article appeared online just after sunrise. It wasn't long, barely 300 words, but it didn't need to be. One photograph showed Ethan opening the front door of the Calloway estate. Another captured Maya walking beside Margaret through the rose garden. The final image froze a quiet moment as Maya smiled while holding an old children's book inside Eleanor Calloway's library. The headline read, "Who is the woman who captured Ethan Calloway's heart?" Within hours, dozens of other publications repeated the same story. Some guessed she was a philanthropist. Others claimed she was secretly involved in Calloway Technologies. One article confidently, but incorrectly, described her as an investment consultant from New York. No one seemed to know the truth, that she was simply a librarian who believed every child deserved a book. Maya knew nothing about the articles. Monday mornings at the library were always busy. Children returned weekend books. Parents searched for reading lists. College students quietly claimed their favorite study tables. She was helping an elderly woman locate a large print mystery novel when Olivia hurried toward her, phone in hand. "Maya." She looked up. "You may want to see this." Maya frowned. "What happened?" Olivia handed over the phone. Maya's smile slowly disappeared. She scrolled through one headline, then another, then another. There were photographs from the estate, photographs from the botanical garden, even one of Ethan carrying books into the library weeks earlier. Someone had been watching them for far longer than either of them realized. "I don't understand," Maya whispered. Olivia rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but it feels strange." She looked around the library. "This place has always felt quiet." "It still is." Olivia smiled gently. "The internet is noisy. Don't let it convince you your life has changed overnight." Across the city, Ethan was already in the middle of an emergency communications meeting. His public relations director projected headlines across a large conference room screen. "We've received more than 200 media inquiries." Another executive added, "Several networks are requesting interviews." Daniel folded his arms. "Decline all of them." The communications director looked at Ethan. "What would you like us to say?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied one of the photographs. Maya wasn't posing. She wasn't looking toward the camera. She was looking at a child standing just outside the frame. Even in a stolen photograph, she had been paying attention to someone else. Finally, Ethan spoke. "We issue one statement." The room became quiet. No interviews. No speculation. No discussion of Maya's private life. He looked around the table. "If anyone asks who she is..." A faint smile crossed his face. "Tell them she's someone doing extraordinary work for children." The communications director nodded. "And your relationship?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "That's not the public's story to tell." By lunchtime, reporters had begun gathering outside the library. They remained on the sidewalk, cameras pointed toward the entrance. None attempted to enter, but their presence alone changed everything. Parents hesitated before bringing their children inside. Volunteers whispered among themselves. Lily pressed her face against the front window. "Miss Brooks?" Maya knelt beside her. "Yes?" "Why are those people outside?" Maya searched for an answer, simple enough for a child. "They're curious." "About books." She smiled. "I wish." Lily looked out again. "My grandma says curious people should ask nicely." Maya laughed softly. "Your grandma sounds very wise." Oh, Lily whispered conspiratorially. "Why don't they?" Before Maya could answer, the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside. Several camera shutters clicked immediately. He ignored them. His attention remained fixed on Maya. "You okay?" She nodded. "I think so. I should have gotten here sooner." "You came?" She smiled. "That's soon enough." They walked into Maya's office at the back of the library, away from curious eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan sighed. "I'm sorry." She looked genuinely surprised. "You didn't invite reporters?" "No, but my life did." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've spent years keeping my personal life private. I can see why. I never wanted this for you." Maya sat quietly, thinking. Finally she asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. If these cameras never go away." She paused. "How do you keep living normally?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I learned something from my grandmother." Maya laughed. "I had a feeling she was about to appear." He nodded toward the window. "She used to tell me, never rearrange your life to satisfy someone who only came to watch." Maya repeated the sentence softly. Never rearrange your life. She looked toward the reporters outside. They don't get to decide whether I keep helping children. They don't. They don't get to make this library feel different. No. She smiled. Then I suppose I'll go back to work. Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration. You really are remarkable. She shook her head. I'm just stubborn. I've noticed. Both of them laughed. The tension that had followed them all morning seemed to dissolve. That afternoon, as reporters gradually realized neither Ethan nor Maya intended to give interviews, the crowd outside slowly began to shrink. Inside, story time began exactly at 3 o'clock. Every chair was filled. Children gathered on the colorful rug, waiting expectantly. Maya opened a picture book and looked around the room. For today's story. She smiled. We're going to read about courage. Lily raised her hand immediately. The quiet kind? Maya's eyes met Ethan's across the room. He stood near the back, helping a little boy choose a bookmark. She smiled. Yes. The quiet kind. And for the next 30 minutes, the noise of headlines, cameras, and speculation faded away. Because inside the walls of that little library, the only story that truly mattered was the one being read aloud. Outside, however, a black sedan pulled silently to the curb. A distinguished woman stepped out, accompanied by 2 members of a charitable foundation. She watched through the library window as Maya read to the children. One of the men beside her asked quietly, "Should we introduce ourselves now?" The woman shook her head. No. Let's hear the story first. Neither Maya nor Ethan realized that the visitor had traveled across the country with the power to change the future of Maya's literacy work in ways neither of them had ever imagined. The story ended with applause. Not the loud formal applause of boardrooms and fundraising galas, the enthusiastic kind only children could produce. Several little hands shot into the air before Maya had even closed the book. Can we read another one? Tomorrow, Maya said with a smile. Oh. The chorus of disappointment filled the room, followed almost immediately by laughter. As the children lined up to borrow books, Maya noticed the distinguished woman still standing quietly near the entrance. She appeared to be in her early 60s, silver hair, a navy blue suit, simple pearl earrings. Nothing about her appearance seemed designed to attract attention. Yet, there was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. The woman waited until every child had left the reading corner before approaching. Miss Brooks? Maya stood. Yes, my name is Helen Whitmore. She extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. Maya returned the handshake warmly. The pleasure is mine. Helen glanced around the library. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I've just watched you spend 30 minutes convincing 20 children that reading is an adventure. She smiled. I haven't seen that in a very long time. Before Maya could respond, Helen continued. I'd like to introduce my colleagues. The 2 men standing nearby stepped forward. One carried a leather portfolio. The other offered a polite smile. We're with the National Children's Literacy Alliance. Maya recognized the name immediately. It was one of the largest non-profit organizations supporting literacy programs across the country. Her eyes widened slightly. I wasn't expecting. Helen laughed. I imagine not. From the back of the room, Ethan quietly watched the conversation. Daniel, who had arrived moments earlier, leaned closer. You know who that is? Ethan nodded slowly. Helen Whitmore. The chairwoman. The very one. Daniel folded his arms. She almost never visits local programs herself. I know. So why is she here? Ethan looked toward Maya. I don't think she's here because of me. He smiled. I think she's here because of Maya. Helen accepted Maya's invitation to sit in the library's small meeting room. The walls were covered with children's drawings, handwritten thank you notes, photographs from reading events. Nothing looked expensive. Everything looked loved. Helen studied the room carefully. You've built quite a community. We've been fortunate. Helen smiled. You keep saying we. Maya looked puzzled. Shouldn't I? Many people would have said I. Maya shook her head. I couldn't do any of this alone. She pointed toward the hallway. Olivia keeps this library running. The volunteers organize the programs. The parents encourage the children. The teachers continue the work after they leave here. She smiled softly. I just happen to be one person in the middle. Helen exchanged a quick glance with the man carrying the portfolio. Neither of them said anything, but both wrote something down. An hour later, Helen asked if Maya would show them around the neighborhood. They walked together through nearby schools, community centers, and local parks. Every few blocks, someone greeted Maya by name. A crossing guard waved enthusiastically. A bakery owner handed her a paper bag filled with fresh rolls for the library volunteers. Teenagers stopped to thank her for helping them apply for college scholarships. Helen noticed every interaction. Finally, she asked quietly, "Does this happen everywhere you go?" Maya looked confused. "What do you mean? People seem genuinely happy to see you." Maya laughed. "I've lived here most of my life. That's probably why." Helen smiled. "No." She shook her head gently. "I've met many people who've lived in one place for decades. They aren't greeted this way." That evening, after returning to the library, Helen stood near the front entrance with Ethan. "You chose well." Ethan smiled. "I didn't choose." "What do you mean?" "We became friends. The rest happened naturally." Helen looked through the glass doors, where Maya was helping Lily tie the ribbon on a stack of borrowed books. "I've spent 40 years interviewing non-profit leaders." She paused. "I've learned something." "What's that?" "The best ones never realize they're leading. They simply keep serving." Ethan's smile grew. "That sounds like Maya." "It does." Helen turned toward him. "I also understand why the media is interested." Ethan's expression became more serious. "I'd appreciate it if—" She gently interrupted him. "I have no intention of adding to that noise." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you. I came for literacy." She smiled warmly. "I found character." Before leaving, Helen asked Maya one final question. If resources weren't limited. She looked thoughtfully around the library. "What would you build?" Maya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward a wall covered with photographs from community events. She pointed to a picture of children reading beneath a tree. "I wouldn't build one library." Helen listened quietly. "I'd build hundreds." She smiled. "Not giant buildings. Warm places. Places where children feel safe. Places where grandparents read stories. Places where teenagers mentor younger students." She looked back at Helen. "I think literacy grows fastest where people feel they belong." Silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Thoughtful silence. Helen slowly closed her notebook. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." Maya tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Helen reached into her portfolio and removed a cream-colored folder. She placed it gently on the table. "Our board recently approved funding for a new national initiative." Maya looked down at the folder but didn't open it. Helen continued. "We've been searching for someone to design it." Maya's heart skipped. "I don't understand." "We're looking for a national director." She smiled kindly. "Someone who understands communities before they understand budgets." She paused. "Miss Brooks, we'd like you to consider leading it." For several long seconds, Maya simply stared. She was certain she had misheard. "A national—" "Ah," Helen nodded. "Yes. I've never managed an organization that size." "I know. I've never even left Washington for work." "I know. I'm not qualified." Helen smiled knowingly. "Do you know the first thing every extraordinary leader has said to me?" Maya blinked. "What?" "I'm not qualified." Both women laughed softly. Helen gently pushed the folder closer. "Take your time. This isn't a decision for today." She stood and offered her hand once more. "But I sincerely hope your answer will eventually be yes." After Helen and her colleagues departed, Maya remained standing in the meeting room, still holding the unopened folder. Ethan walked in quietly. "You okay?" She looked up slowly. "I don't think my life is ever going to be quiet again." He smiled. "Probably not." She looked down at the folder, then back at him. "I'm scared." He nodded. "I know. What if I fail?" Ethan stepped beside her. "Then you'll learn. And if I succeed," he smiled even more warmly, "then millions of children you've never met will someday thank a librarian from Seattle without ever knowing her name." Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because she had made a decision, because for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that her dreams might be larger than the walls of a single library. Outside, unnoticed by either of them, a television news van pulled to the curb. This time, however, they weren't there to ask about Ethan Calloway. They were there because the country had just started noticing Maya Brooks. The television crew waited patiently outside. Unlike the reporters from earlier in the week, they made no attempt to rush inside or surprise anyone with cameras. Instead, a young producer walked to the front desk and left a sealed envelope with Olivia. "If Miss Brooks is interested, she'll know how to reach us," he said with a polite smile before leaving. Olivia watched the news van disappear down the street before carrying the envelope to Maya's office. "I think the world has officially found you." Maya looked up from the National Initiative folder I was hoping the world would get distracted. Olivia laughed. It doesn't seem likely. She placed the envelope on the desk. They didn't pressure us. They simply asked if you'd consider an interview. Maya didn't open it. Not today. Good. Olivia smiled. Today has already been big enough. That evening, Ethan and Maya walked along the waterfront. The sun was beginning to set, casting streaks of orange and gold across Elliott Bay. The city seemed quieter here, almost as though the water absorbed some of the noise. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Maya broke the silence. When you first became successful. Ethan glanced at her. Were you afraid? He smiled. Terrified. Really? Every day? She looked surprised. You hide it well. I've had practice. They continued walking. I always imagined confidence came first. It rarely does. He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. Most of the time, he watched the ripples spread. Confidence arrives after you've already done the thing that scared you. Maya thought about the board presentation, the reading program, the national offer. Maybe he was right. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was simply refusing to let fear make the decision. As they reached the end of the pier, they found an elderly man struggling to repair a small wooden bench. Several tools lay scattered beside him. A loose plank had slipped from its frame. Without saying a word, Ethan knelt beside him. Need an extra pair of hands? The man looked up and smiled. I won't turn them down. Within moments, Maya was holding screws while Ethan steadied the bench. The three of them worked together until the final bolt was tightened. The old man brushed the sawdust from his hands. There. He sat carefully on the bench. No wobbling. He looked at Ethan. What do I owe you? Ethan shook his head. Nothing. The man turned to Maya. You picked a good one. Maya felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Before she could answer, the old man chuckled. I've lived long enough to recognize character. He stood, picked up his toolbox, and slowly walked away. Neither Ethan nor Maya spoke immediately. Finally, Maya smiled. I don't think he was talking about the bench. I don't think so either. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world around them seemed to disappear. Not because something dramatic happened, because something quiet did. Without thinking, Ethan reached for her hand. This time, Maya didn't hesitate. She slipped her fingers gently into his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Sometimes, silence carried the words people weren't ready to say aloud. Later that night, Margaret sat alone in Eleanor's library. The house had gone quiet. Richard had already gone to bed. She opened an old leather journal that had belonged to her mother-in-law. Its pages contained favorite quotations, gardening notes, and reflections collected over decades. A folded letter slipped onto her lap. She frowned. She had never noticed it before. Across the front, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, were the words, "For whoever worries more about protecting this family than loving it." Margaret slowly unfolded the letter. Her eyes moved across the first paragraph. Then the second. By the time she reached the final page, tears blurred the ink. Richard quietly entered the room. He stopped when he saw the letter in her hands. What is it? Margaret looked up. Eleanor wrote this years ago. She handed him the final page. Richard read the closing lines aloud. The greatest danger to a family is not welcoming the wrong person. It is rejecting the right one, because fear spoke louder than love. The room fell silent. Margaret carefully folded the letter. I spent so many years trying to protect Ethan. Richard placed a comforting hand over hers. You did. But, somewhere along the way, she smiled sadly. I forgot he no longer needed protection. He needed trust. Richard nodded. I think he found that. The following morning, Maya gathered the volunteers before the library opened. I have something I'd like to share. Everyone looked up. Arthur was there. Olivia, several teachers, parents, even Lily sat proudly in the front row. Maya held up the folder from the National Children's Literacy Alliance. I've been offered an opportunity. A murmur spread through the room. She continued. I haven't accepted it yet. Because before I make any decision. She looked around the room. I need to know something. Everyone listened. If this program grows beyond Seattle, she smiled gently, will you help me make sure this library never loses what makes it special? For a moment, no one answered. Then Lily raised her hand. You mean we'll still have story time? Maya laughed. Absolutely. Then I'm in. The room erupted in laughter. Arthur stood. You'll have my support. So will mine, Olivia added. One by one, every volunteer echoed the same promise. Some offered their time. Others, their expertise. A retired teacher promised to train new volunteers. A local business owner pledged books every month. Parents offered weekend workshops. Maya looked around the room, overwhelmed. She had never been building this dream alone. She simply hadn't realized how many people had been quietly building it with her. Outside the library windows, Ethan watched the gathering from the sidewalk. He didn't go inside. He wanted this moment to belong to Maya and the community she had inspired. As he turned to leave, his phone rang. It was Daniel. "You need to come to the office." Ethan frowned. "What happened?" "We've received a takeover proposal." Ethan stopped walking. "From who?" Daniel's voice grew serious. "A company you've spent 10 years trying to keep away from Callaway Technologies." The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. For the first time since meeting Maya, a challenge had arrived that couldn't be solved with kindness alone. And he knew, deep down, that whatever happened next would test not only his leadership, but the future he had begun imagining with Maya. By the time Ethan reached Callaway Technologies, the atmosphere inside the headquarters had changed. The usual confidence that filled the executive floor had been replaced by quiet urgency. Assistants moved quickly between conference rooms. Lawyers arrived, carrying thick binders. Financial analysts stood in small groups, speaking in lowered voices. Daniel was waiting outside Ethan's office. "You got here fast." "I had a feeling this wasn't something that could wait." "It couldn't." Daniel handed him a tablet. "The proposal came in an hour ago." Ethan scanned the opening pages. The acquiring company was one he knew well. For years its executives had pursued aggressive takeovers, cutting community programs, reducing employee benefits, and selling off divisions that weren't immediately profitable. It wasn't just business. It was a philosophy completely opposite to his own. "They're offering an extraordinary amount." "They are," Daniel agreed. "But that's not the real problem." "What is?" "They've already been quietly purchasing shares." Ethan looked up. "How much?" "Enough that we can't ignore them anymore." Silence settled over the room. Finally, Ethan closed the tablet. "We're not selling." "I knew you'd say that." Daniel smiled faintly. "I've already scheduled the board meeting." Across the city, Maya sat alone in the library before opening hours. The National Children's Literacy Alliance folder rested on the table in front of her. She had read every page twice. The position would allow her to expand reading programs across the country. New libraries, teacher training, community partnerships. Millions of children could benefit. Yet one sentence continued echoing in her thoughts. Relocation may be required depending on implementation needs. She looked around the quiet library. Every bookshelf held memories. Every reading corner carried laughter. Every table reminded her of children discovering stories for the first time. Could she really leave? Olivia quietly entered carrying 2 muffins. "I guessed you skipped breakfast." Maya smiled. "I was distracted." "I can see that." Olivia sat beside her. "You've been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. Maya laughed softly. "Has it been that obvious?" "Only because I've done the same thing before every major decision in my life." Maya looked toward the window. "What if saying yes means leaving everything I've built?" Olivia thought carefully before answering. "What if saying yes means allowing everything you've built to grow beyond these walls?" Maya remained silent. Olivia continued. "You've spent years teaching children that stories don't end because someone turns the page." She smiled warmly. "Maybe this is just your next page." That afternoon, Ethan's board meeting stretched well beyond its scheduled time. Some directors favored negotiating. Others wanted to fight. Several investors worried about the financial risks. When everyone had spoken, the room fell quiet. One board member looked toward Ethan. "The decision is yours." Ethan stood slowly. "When my grandmother helped build this company with my grandfather." He glanced around the table. "They believed success meant leaving people better than you found them." He paused. "We've made mistakes. We've lost opportunities. But we've never abandoned that principle." He folded the proposal and placed it on the conference table. "I'm not interested in becoming wealthier by becoming someone else." No one spoke. The room remained completely still. Finally, one of the longest-serving directors smiled. "I was hoping that's what you'd say." One by one, the others nodded. The decision was unanimous. They would resist the takeover, whatever it cost. That evening, Maya received a phone call from Helen Whitmore. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I wanted to check on you." Maya smiled. "That's kind of you, but I don't want an answer today." Helen's voice remained gentle. "But I do have one question." "I'm listening." "If you removed fear from the decision." She paused. "What would your heart choose?" The question lingered long after the call ended. Maya carried it with her as she locked the library and began walking home. If fear disappeared, What would she choose? She wasn't certain, but for the first time, she realized she wanted to find out. The weekend arrived with clear skies. Ethan invited Maya to a neighborhood farmers market far from downtown. There were no photographers, no reporters, just families, musicians, fresh flowers, and small businesses lining the streets. For a few precious hours, life felt wonderfully ordinary. They sampled homemade bread, shared a basket of fresh strawberries, listened to a violinist performing beside a fountain. As they wandered past a flower stall, Maya stopped. An elderly florist smiled. "Looking for anything special?" Maya glanced at Ethan. "White daisies." The florist gathered a small bouquet. "My wife's favorite," he said. "They're beautiful because they don't compete with other flowers." Maya smiled. "They remind me of someone." Ethan knew exactly who she meant. Grace. He quietly paid for the bouquet before Maya could reach for her purse. They carried the flowers to a nearby park where a community memorial garden overlooked the water. Maya gently placed the daisies beside a flowering tree. "I wish she could see all this." Ethan stood beside her. "I think she can." Maya looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I believe love has a way of staying." Neither spoke again for several moments. The breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers across the garden. Finally, Maya reached for Ethan's hand. "I've been thinking about Helen's offer." He squeezed her hand gently. "And? I don't know what I'm going to decide." "You don't have to today." "But I do know something." She looked directly into his eyes. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of dreaming bigger." A proud smile spread across Ethan's face. "That's all I ever wanted for you." Just beyond the garden entrance, an older man watched them for a moment before quietly walking away. Neither Ethan nor Maya recognized him, but he recognized Ethan immediately. As he reached his car, he made a phone call. "I've confirmed it," he said. "He's distracted." A pause. Then he added quietly, "If we're going to make our move against Callaway Technologies, this is the moment." Unaware of the storm beginning to gather around his company, Ethan stood beside Maya watching the sunset over the water, believing that for one perfect afternoon, the world had finally grown quiet again. He had no way of knowing that by Monday morning, both his company and his future with Maya would be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Monday mornings rarely surprised Ethan. He liked them that way. Predictable, organized, productive. But as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, he immediately sensed something was wrong. No one was chatting over coffee. No one lingered outside conference rooms. Every face carried the same expression. Concern. Daniel was already waiting outside Ethan's office. "You've seen the news?" Ethan shook his head. "I came straight in." Daniel handed him his tablet. Several financial headlines filled the screen. Callaway Technologies stock surges after takeover speculation. Activist investors pressure Ethan Callaway to negotiate board faces growing shareholder demands. Ethan read quietly before placing the tablet on his desk. "They're trying to pressure us publicly." Daniel nodded. "They know they probably can't win the boardroom first. So, they're trying to win public opinion." "Exactly." Ethan looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle. "They're treating people like numbers." Daniel smiled faintly. "Which is exactly why they'll never understand you." Across town, Maya unlocked the library doors just as the first rays of sunlight reached the front steps. She had barely switched on the lights when she noticed someone waiting outside. Arthur Donnelly. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee. "I hope I'm not too early." "You never are." She opened the door wider. Arthur stepped inside and handed her one of the cups. "I thought we should talk." Maya smiled. "About the national position?" He nodded. "And about you." They settled near the reading corner where colorful cushions still lay scattered from Friday's story hour. Arthur looked around the room. "This place changed because someone cared enough to stay." Maya lowered her eyes. "I've been thinking about that." "I imagine you have." He folded his hands. "When I was your age, I was offered a promotion in Chicago." "You took it?" "No." "Do you regret it?" Arthur smiled thoughtfully. "For years." "Yes." He paused. "Until I realized something." "What?" "I wasn't saying no because it was the wrong opportunity. I was saying no because I was afraid." Maya listened carefully. "So, if I could speak to the younger version of myself today." He smiled. "I'd tell him that purpose doesn't become smaller because it reaches farther." Those words settled deeply inside her. Just before noon, Lily rushed into the library, carrying a folded piece of paper. "Miss Brooks!" Maya laughed. "You look excited." "I finished another story." "Already?" Lily nodded proudly. "And this one's about you." Maya accepted the pages. The title read, The librarian who built 1,000 libraries. She looked up. But I've only worked in one. Lily grinned. Not yet. Maya laughed softly. Children, she thought, often believed in people before those people believed in themselves. She carefully folded the story and slipped it into her notebook. I'll treasure this forever. I knew you would. That afternoon, Ethan's executive meeting ended later than expected. As employees began leaving the conference room, Daniel remained behind. You've got another visitor. I don't have anything else scheduled. I know. Daniel lowered his voice. It's your mother. Ethan looked surprised. My mother? She insisted on waiting. A few moments later, Margaret entered the office. She carried no folders, no notes, only a small envelope. I hope I'm not interrupting. You never need an appointment. She smiled. I thought you might disagree. Ethan gestured toward the chairs. What brings you here? Margaret sat down slowly. I wanted to return something. She handed him the envelope. Inside was an old photograph. Ethan stared at it. It showed Eleanor Calloway sitting beneath the oak tree in the estate garden. Beside her sat a much younger Margaret. Both were laughing. I've never seen this picture. It was hidden inside one of Eleanor's journals. Margaret looked at the photograph fondly. She gave me advice the day that picture was taken. What did she say? Margaret smiled through misty eyes. She told me, don't spend so much time protecting your family's future that you forget to celebrate their happiness. Silence filled the office. Margaret looked directly at her son. I think I forgot. Ethan reached across the desk and gently squeezed her hand. You were doing what you believed was right. I know, she nodded. But believing you're right doesn't always mean you are. She took a steady breath. I owe Maya an apology. You don't owe her one. I think I do. She smiled softly. Not because I treated her badly, because I judged her before I truly knew her. That evening, Maya received a call from Helen Whitmore. I hope you've had time to think. I have. And? Maya walked slowly between the library shelves. I still don't have an answer. Helen laughed warmly. Good. Maya blinked. Good? The biggest decisions shouldn't arrive quickly. She paused. But I'd like to ask you for one favor. Of course. Our board is meeting in Boston next month. We'd love for you to visit. I'm not asking you to accept the position. I simply want the board to meet the woman we've been talking about. Maya smiled. I'd like that. Wonderful. We'll arrange everything. After the call ended, Maya leaned against one of the bookshelves. Boston. She had never traveled there. The idea felt exciting and terrifying. As dusk settled over Seattle, Ethan arrived at the library carrying takeout from their favorite cafe. I had a feeling you forgot dinner. Maya smiled. You know me too well. They carried their meals to the small courtyard behind the library. The city noise seemed far away. For several minutes, they simply ate, enjoying the rare quiet. Finally, Maya spoke. Helen invited me to Boston. Ethan looked up. When? Next month. What did you say? I said yes. His smile widened. I'm proud of you. I haven't accepted the job. I know. But you accepted the opportunity to explore it. She laughed. Is there always a lesson hidden inside everything you say? My grandmother would probably say yes. Maya smiled. I think Grace would have liked her. I think they would have argued. About what? Which one of us worries more? Both of them laughed. The sound echoed softly through the courtyard. Neither noticed a man standing across the street, watching from inside a parked car. He lowered a camera after taking one final photograph. Then he made a brief phone call. The pressure on the company is working, he said quietly. But there's something else. A pause. The librarian. Another pause. I think she's becoming Ethan Calloway's greatest strength. The voice on the other end answered with chilling calm. Then, perhaps, she should become his greatest weakness. The call ended. The car pulled silently away into the night. For the first time since Ethan and Maya had met, the danger surrounding them was no longer limited to gossip, headlines, or public attention. Someone had begun thinking of Maya not as a private citizen, but as leverage, and neither of them had any idea the next chapter of their story would demand more courage than either had ever been asked to give. Rain tapped gently against the library windows the following afternoon. Inside, the familiar warmth of turning pages and quiet conversations made it easy to believe the outside world had remained unchanged. Maya was helping a group of elementary school students create bookmarks decorated with their favorite literary quotes. One little boy proudly held up his finished bookmark. It says, "A reader lives 1,000 lives." Maya smiled. That's one of my favorites. What does it mean? She knelt beside him. It means every book lets you experience someone else's world. The boy thought for a moment. So, reading helps us understand people? It does. He nodded with the solemn seriousness only children could manage. Then grown-ups should read more. The room erupted in laughter. Even Maya couldn't stop smiling. I think you might be onto something. Across the city, the emergency board meeting had entered its 4th hour. Charts covered the conference room walls. Financial projections, shareholder reports, legal strategies. Daniel closed another presentation and looked toward Ethan. We have one advantage. Ethan folded his arms. What is it? The acquiring company expected panic. They expected division. Daniel glanced around the room. They underestimated loyalty. Several senior executives nodded. One of them spoke. I've worked here for 26 years. Another added, so have I. A third smiled. We're staying. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. Ethan looked around the table and felt something his competitors had failed to calculate. Trust. It wasn't listed on financial statements. It couldn't be purchased during negotiations. And yet, it was the strongest asset the company possessed. Late that afternoon, Maya stepped outside the library to lock the donation box near the entrance. She noticed a man standing across the street. He wore a dark baseball cap and sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. The moment their eyes met, he turned away and disappeared around the corner. Maya frowned. Something about the encounter unsettled her. Not because he had done anything threatening, because it felt intentional. She stood still for another moment before shaking off the feeling and returning inside. She decided not to mention it. After all, it could have been nothing. That evening, Ethan arrived carrying 2 containers of tomato soup and warm grilled cheese sandwiches. You've officially made this a tradition, Maya said as she unlocked the staff entrance. I've accepted my fate. She laughed. I didn't realize soup counted as fate. It does on rainy Tuesdays. They settled into the reading corner after the last volunteer left. The colorful cushions remained scattered across the floor from story time. Maya looked around the room. I've been thinking. Ethan smiled. That usually leads somewhere interesting. What if I accepted the national position? She paused. But stayed here. He tilted his head. You mean splitting your time? She nodded. I don't want Seattle to become a place I used to love. Ethan considered the idea carefully. You know what I think? What? I think you're asking the wrong question. She smiled knowingly. I had a feeling you'd say that. The question isn't whether you can leave this library. He looked around the room. It's whether you've built something strong enough to keep growing while you're gone. Maya followed his gaze. Children's artwork covered one wall. Volunteer schedules covered another. Books donated by the community filled every shelf. Arthur was mentoring younger librarians. Olivia had become the heart of daily operations. Parents had begun organizing weekend reading circles without being asked. Slowly, she realized something. The library no longer depended entirely on her. It had become a community, and communities survived because many hands carried them forward. Tears gathered unexpectedly in her eyes. I never noticed. Ethan smiled. That's because you've been too busy building it. Meanwhile, Margaret invited Richard into Eleanor's old library. Several notebooks lay open across the large oak table. What are you working on? Richard asked. Margaret looked up. I'm reading Eleanor's journals. And? I've discovered something. She turned one of the worn pages toward him. Eleanor's handwriting filled the paper. The measure of a family is not the wealth it protects, but the kindness it multiplies. Richard smiled. That sounds exactly like her. Margaret nodded. I've spent years believing our responsibility was protecting the Calloway legacy. She gently closed the journal. Eleanor believed the legacy was never the company. It was the people. Richard took her hand. I think she'd be proud of you. Margaret smiled sadly. I hope someday Ethan will be too. The following morning, Maya was organizing returned books when a courier arrived carrying a large cardboard box. Delivery for Miss Brooks. I wasn't expecting anything. She signed for it anyway. Several volunteers gathered curiously as she opened the package. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. Each envelope carried a different return address. Schools from Oregon, libraries in Colorado, teachers from Maine, community centers in Texas. Confused, Maya opened the first one. It was from a 5th grade teacher. Your literacy presentation was shared during one of our educator meetings. My students wanted you to know they've started their own lunchtime reading club because of your story. She opened another. A librarian in Ohio described launching a family reading night after hearing about Maya's community program. Another letter came from a high school senior who had decided to volunteer at a children's library. Maya's hands began to tremble. I don't understand. Olivia picked up one of the envelopes. I think I do. What? Your speech. She smiled. It didn't stop in Seattle. One by one, volunteers quietly read portions of the letters aloud. Each carried the same message: hope, inspiration, gratitude. Not because Maya had become famous, because people had heard her heart. As the final letter slipped from the box, a small card fluttered onto the table. There was no signature, only a single sentence. Stories travel farther than the people who tell them. Keep telling yours. Maya looked at the card for a long time. Then she carefully placed it inside Grace's old journal. Across the street, the same dark sedan from the previous evening slowed briefly before driving away. Inside, the passenger lowered a pair of binoculars. They've started receiving national attention. The driver kept his eyes on the road. Good. That makes the timing easier. Neither man explained what that meant, but somewhere beyond Seattle, plans were already being set in motion. Plans that would soon force Ethan to choose between protecting the company he had spent his life building, or protecting the woman who had quietly become the center of the life he wanted to build next. The first sign that something had changed came on a Thursday morning, not in the boardroom, not at the library, but in Ethan's inbox. Daniel entered his office carrying a folder marked confidential. I wish this were routine. Ethan looked up from his laptop. I'm guessing it isn't. Daniel placed the folder on the desk. Our cybersecurity team intercepted a series of emails sent to several board members. Ethan opened the file. The messages were anonymous. Each one claimed that Callaway Technologies was becoming unstable under Ethan's leadership. Others suggested the company was spending too much money on community programs rather than maximizing shareholder returns. There were even fabricated reports questioning Ethan's judgment. They're trying to create doubt, Ethan said calmly. Daniel nodded. And if doubt spreads, investors become nervous. Ethan closed the folder. They're playing a long game. So are we. Across town, Maya was preparing for story hour when Arthur arrived, carrying a stack of newspapers. You've made the front page again. She sighed playfully. I was hoping those days were over. Arthur unfolded the paper. The headline wasn't about Ethan. It wasn't about business. It simply read, Local Librarians Reading Movement Spreads Across the Country. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Maya sitting on the library floor, surrounded by children. She hadn't even noticed anyone taking the picture. Arthur smiled. They captured the right moment. Maya studied the image. There was nothing glamorous about it. She wore a simple sweater. Her hair was loosely tied back. A little girl leaned comfortably against her shoulder while she read aloud. It doesn't look important, Maya said softly. Arthur smiled. That's exactly why it is. Later that afternoon, Helen Whitmore called with unexpected news. I hope you're sitting down. Maya laughed. Should I be worried? Quite the opposite. Helen's voice carried unmistakable excitement. The board loved your literacy proposal. But I haven't presented anything. You didn't have to. Maya frowned. I'm confused. We've been collecting testimonials from educators, librarians, parents, and non-profit leaders. Helen paused. The response has been overwhelming. Maya leaned against the bookshelf. What does that mean? It means the board unanimously wants to meet you. She smiled. They've moved your Boston visit forward. When? Next week. The words seemed to echo through the quiet library. Next week. Everything suddenly felt very close. That evening, Ethan met Maya at their favorite waterfront bench. She was unusually quiet. You've been thinking. She smiled. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's learned your silences. She handed him the letter from Helen. They moved the meeting. Ethan read it carefully before looking back at her. Congratulations. I haven't done anything yet. You've spent years doing something. He folded the letter. The rest of the world is only beginning to notice. Maya looked out across the water. What if they expect someone extraordinary? Ethan smiled gently. They're expecting Maya Brooks. That's the only person you need to be. She exhaled slowly. I wish believing that were easier. It gets easier. How? He looked toward the horizon. When you stop trying to deserve opportunities and start recognizing you've already earned them. For several moments, they simply watched the ferries crossing the bay. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket. I almost forgot. He handed her a small, neatly wrapped package. You bought me something? It's not expensive. She carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a simple silver bookmark. Engraved along its edge were the words, every chapter begins with turning a page. Maya ran her fingers over the engraving. It's beautiful. I saw it weeks ago. And? I kept waiting for the right moment. She smiled warmly. I think you found it. She slipped the bookmark into Grace's journal. I'll carry it everywhere. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the library alone. No chauffeur, no assistants, just a small paper bag in one hand. Maya looked pleasantly surprised. Mrs. Calloway. Margaret smiled. I brought cinnamon rolls. Maya laughed. That wasn't necessary. I know. They sat together near the children's reading corner while volunteers prepared for the day. After a long pause, Margaret spoke. I've spent most of my life believing that respect had to be earned. Maya listened quietly. My mother-in-law believed kindness should be given first. She smiled sadly. I think she was wiser than I was. Maya reached across the table. I think she would be proud that you're still willing to learn. Margaret's eyes glistened. I hope so. She hesitated before continuing. I also came to ask you something. Of course. When Ethan was younger, he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. She looked directly at Maya. I haven't seen him laugh this easily in years. A gentle smile crossed her face. So, thank you. Maya felt emotion tighten her throat. You don't have to thank me. I do. Margaret stood and embraced her. It was brief, sincere, and when they stepped apart, both women realized that whatever distance had once existed between them had quietly disappeared. Just after sunset, Daniel called Ethan. His tone was more serious than usual. We have another problem. Ethan stopped outside his apartment building. What happened? Our investigators identified who's coordinating the takeover campaign. Who is it? Daniel lowered his voice. It's not just another corporation. A long silence followed. Then, he spoke the name. Ethan's expression changed instantly. No. He stared into the distance. That's impossible. I wish it were. Daniel continued. He isn't just after Calloway Technologies. He has a personal reason for wanting to destroy your family. For several seconds Ethan couldn't speak. A chapter of his past, one he believed had been closed forever, had just been forced back open. And if Daniel's information was correct, the battle ahead was never about money. It was about revenge. Ethan didn't go home. Instead, he drove straight to the Calloway estate. The lights in his parents' study were still on. Richard looked up from a stack of documents as his son entered. Everything all right? Ethan closed the door behind him. I need to ask you about someone. The seriousness in his voice immediately caught both Richard's and Margaret's attention. Richard slowly removed his reading glasses. Who? Ethan took a slow breath. Victor Ashford. Silence settled over the room. Margaret's face lost its color. Richard leaned back in his chair, saying nothing for several seconds. Finally, he spoke. I hoped you'd never have to hear that name again. Ethan frowned. So, Daniel was right. Richard nodded. He was. Margaret clasped her hands together. Victor and your grandfather were once business partners. Ethan had never heard this before. My grandfather never mentioned him. He wouldn't have. Richard stood and walked toward the fireplace. Years ago, Victor wanted the company to expand at any cost. Layoffs, aggressive acquisitions, cutting corners, it didn't matter to him. And grandfather refused? He believed a company should never sacrifice people for profit. Richard looked at Ethan. That disagreement ended their partnership. Margaret added quietly, Victor blamed our family for everything that happened afterward. What happened? He made a series of reckless investments. They failed. He lost almost everything. Richard sighed. Instead of accepting responsibility, he convinced himself that your grandfather had ruined his life. Ethan folded his arms. So, he's been carrying that resentment all these years. Apparently. Margaret looked worried. But revenge has a way of growing if it's never confronted. The following morning, Maya boarded a city bus instead of driving. She wanted time to think. The silver bookmark Ethan had given her rested inside Grace's journal on her lap. She opened the journal at random. A small handwritten note, tucked between the pages years ago by Grace, slipped into her hand. She had completely forgotten it. The faded paper read, When life offers you the chance to help more people, don't ask if you're enough. Ask how many lives may never change if you say no. Maya stared at the familiar handwriting. A lump formed in her throat. It felt as though her grandmother had reached across time to answer the question she'd been wrestling with for weeks. She carefully folded the note and whispered, I miss you. An elderly woman sitting across the aisle smiled kindly. Someone gave you good advice? Maya looked up and smiled through watery eyes. The best. At Calloway Technologies, Daniel gathered the executive team. We've confirmed Victor Ashford has been financing shell companies to quietly purchase shares. One executive looked stunned. Can we stop him? We can. Daniel nodded toward Ethan. But we'll have to move quickly. Ethan stood. For years we've built relationships based on trust. He looked around the room. Now it's time to rely on those relationships. He began assigning responsibilities. Some executives contacted long-term investors. Others coordinated legal protections. The communications team prepared a public statement emphasizing the company's commitment to employees and communities. No one complained. No one hesitated. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted. They were no longer reacting. They were preparing. That afternoon, Maya received another unexpected visitor. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't Helen. It was Lily and her mother. Lily carried a carefully wrapped package almost as large as she was. "I made this for your trip." "My trip?" "To Boston." Maya knelt beside her. "You remembered?" "I remember everything." The little girl proudly handed over the package. Inside was a handmade scrapbook. Every page contained drawings from children at the library. Some had written short messages. "Thank you for reading to us. Please come back soon. Don't forget Seattle." One drawing showed Maya standing in front of hundreds of tiny libraries stretching across the country. Above them were the words, "One story can reach everywhere." Maya blinked back tears. "I don't even know what to say." Lily hugged her tightly. "You don't have to say anything. You just have to keep reading." That evening, Ethan met Maya outside the library. She showed him the scrapbook. He turned each page slowly. "This," he said softly, "is worth more than any award." "I think so too." They sat on the library steps as the sun dipped below the rooftops. After a long silence, Maya looked at him. "I've made my decision." Ethan turned toward her but didn't interrupt. "I'm going to Boston." A proud smile spread across his face. "I had a feeling." "I'm still scared." "You probably always will be." She laughed. "You're not helping." "I am." He smiled warmly. "Being brave doesn't mean fear disappears. It means your purpose becomes louder than your fear." Maya leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing in me before I fully believed in myself." He looked at her with quiet affection. "It was easy." She smiled. "No." She shook her head. "It was love." The words escaped before she could stop them. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Maya's eyes widened. I didn't mean." Ethan gently took her hand. "You don't have to take it back." She searched his face. "Aren't you going to say anything?" He smiled, his eyes warm and unwavering. "I've known for a while." A tear rolled down Maya's cheek as relief washed over her. Neither of them rushed to the moment. There were no grand speeches, no audience. Only two people whose hearts had quietly arrived at the same place. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a black sedan, another camera shutter clicked. The photograph captured the exact moment Ethan reached up and brushed away Maya's tear. The man lowered his camera and sent the image to a secure number. Less than a minute later, his phone buzzed with a reply. "Proceed with phase 2. He looked once more at Ethan and Maya before starting the engine. Neither of them noticed the car disappear into the evening traffic. Neither of them realized that by the end of the week, their private happiness would become the center of a carefully planned attack, one designed to force Ethan into making an impossible choice between the woman he loved and the company that bore his family's name. By Wednesday morning, the photograph had not appeared anywhere online. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it worried Daniel. "They're holding it," he said, studying a wall covered with timelines and reports. Ethan stood beside him. "Why?" "Because information is most valuable when it's released at the right moment." Ethan folded his arms. "So they're waiting?" Daniel nodded. "They're patient. And patient opponents are dangerous." A young analyst entered the room carrying another folder. "We've identified 3 more shell companies connected to Victor Ashford." Daniel accepted the report. "He's building pressure from every direction." Ethan looked toward the city skyline outside the conference room windows. "Then we'll answer with transparency." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You want to go public?" "Not with speculation." Ethan shook his head. "With truth." At the library, excitement filled the building. The children had learned Maya would soon be traveling to Boston. To them, Boston sounded as far away as another planet. "Will there be libraries there?" one little boy asked. Maya laughed. "I certainly hope so." Lily looked suspicious. "What if they don't have story time?" "Then we'll teach them." The children cheered. Olivia watched from across the room, smiling. "You've created something special." Maya looked around at the laughter filling the library. "I didn't create it alone." "No." Olivia nodded. "But you believed it could exist before anyone else did." That afternoon, Maya met Helen Whitmore over a video call to prepare for the board visit. There will be 12 board members, Helen explained. They've all read about your work. Maya swallowed nervously. 12 people sounds intimidating. Helen smiled warmly. They're not coming to judge you. They're coming to learn from you. Maya blinked. From me? Helen leaned closer to the camera. Maya, do you know why your programs succeed? I work hard. You do. But that's not the reason. Helen continued gently. You don't build literacy programs. You build belonging. The words lingered long after the meeting ended. Belonging. Perhaps that had always been the real mission. Books were simply the bridge. Late that evening, Margaret invited Maya to dinner at the Calloway estate. This time, there was no formality, no carefully planned seating arrangement. Richard grilled vegetables in the backyard, while Margaret insisted on teaching Maya an old family recipe for homemade peach cobbler. I should warn you, Richard called from the patio. Your first attempt never looks as good as it tastes. Margaret laughed. That's because your father always sneaks extra peaches. I've been accused. And correctly. Soon the kitchen filled with laughter. Flour dusted the countertops. Margaret accidentally dropped a measuring spoon. Maya laughed so hard, she nearly spilled the cinnamon. For the first time in years, the enormous house didn't feel like an estate. It felt like a home. As dessert baked in the oven, Margaret disappeared upstairs. She returned carrying a small wooden box. I've been waiting for the right time. She handed it to Maya. Inside lay an elegant vintage fountain pen. Its silver cap had been carefully engraved. Maya looked up. It's beautiful. It belonged to Eleanor. Maya immediately tried to hand it back. I can't accept this. Margaret gently closed Maya's fingers around the pen. You can. She always believed important ideas deserved to be written with something meaningful. A smile touched Margaret's lips. I think she'd want you to use it when you write the next chapter of your work. Emotion caught in Maya's throat. I'll treasure it. I know you will. As Ethan drove Maya home later that night, neither of them noticed a black SUV several cars behind. Inside, Victor Ashford watched silently from the back seat. He had aged considerably since the photographs Ethan had seen. Silver hair, deep lines around his eyes. But the anger remained untouched by time. His assistant glanced into the rearview mirror. They seem happy. Victor's expression never changed. Happiness creates blind spots. He watched Ethan's car disappear around a corner. I've spent 20 years waiting for Richard Calloway to understand what it feels like to lose everything. The assistant hesitated. And the librarian? Victor's voice remained cold. She's not the target. He paused. She's the leverage. The next morning began peacefully. Maya arrived early to prepare for a volunteer training session. As she unlocked the front door, she noticed a neatly wrapped package sitting on the welcome mat. There was no shipping label, no return address, just her name, handwritten in black ink. She looked around. The street was quiet. Assuming it had been left by a volunteer, she carried it inside. Olivia arrived a few minutes later. What's that? I don't know. Together, they carefully opened the package. Inside was a first edition copy of Charlotte's Web. Its pages were beautifully preserved. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note. It read, "Every great librarian knows that stories can change lives." Maya smiled. That's thoughtful. Then she turned the card over. Her smile faded. On the back, written in different handwriting, was another sentence. Let's hope yours doesn't become one. The room fell silent. Olivia slowly took the card from Maya's trembling hand. This isn't a gift. Maya looked toward the library windows. For the first time since all of this had begun, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Not uncertainty, not pressure, fear. Miles away, Daniel's phone rang. The moment he heard the words on the other end, he stood abruptly. Ethan. His voice was calm, but urgent. You need to leave the board meeting immediately. What happened? Daniel didn't soften the truth. They've stopped trying to attack your company. A heavy silence followed. They've just made it personal. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. What would you do if you were Ethan? Would you risk everything to protect the person you love, or fight to save the legacy your family built? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, true wealth isn't measured by the money we keep, but by the lives we change, the love we protect, and the courage we show when life tests us the most. Thank you for spending your time with Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Until next time, keep believing in kindness, second chances, and the power of love to overcome even the greatest storms.